back in search of ore. And now it's time that you are gone. So farewell, Atlas Miner. And farewell, Mud and Pony too. Who's the sector same to you? The pirate bastards ran him through. So farewell, Atlas Miner. They promised you a diamond mine, but I'll be damned, it's hard to find. I hope there's justice for their crimes. And farewell, Atlas Miner. And farewell, friend, don't take it hard. Getting killed ain't all that bad. I'll treat you well, Atlas Miner.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Metaverse Nomads podcast, where we like our intro so much we try to play it twice in a row. Collectively, we're not only here to share our thoughts about play-to-earn games, we also lead a play-to-earn gaming guild called Rome. You can learn more about Rome down in the description. Joining me today are my fellow nomads. And guys, as we go around the room with introductions today, I want you to share with us what you think is the amount of passive play-to-earn income you need to live comfortably and exclusively in the metaverse. And we'll start with you, Jesse.
Okay. So the kind of income that you need to live, or to
Like, how could
from the metaverse?
how could you just throw your life away financially and just say, this is what I need daily in income?
You know, I think it depends on the lifestyle you're looking for and what part of the world you want to call home. Because there's a lot of places where you could do it for a lot less. I mean, if you want to move to, the Philippines, Thailand, Costa Rica, I mean, there's a lot of places that have excellent internet that have a low cost of living, but also high quality of life. You know, it depends what you're into. If you're a surfer or a scuba diver, or if you like the city. I chose to move here to Amsterdam from the U.S., so this is kind of my pace right now. But I think it just really gets down to what's going to work for you. And essentially, I am full time now in this space, so it must be working for me. Even when we see all that blood in the water right now, the market. I say, when do you get clams? You get clams at low tide. So right now is opportunity.
No doubt about it. We know blood in the water in the crypto space means time to buy. All right.
One other thing I wanted to add before we go on is that song that you guys heard, we played a little bit of. We love it. It's called Atlas Miner, and it's created by the JMZ, who is he's one of our guildies in Rome. You also will find him in the Star Atlas Discord, but he created that song Atlas Miner. I think it's great.
Someone asked if that's on Spotify. Do we know?
No, it's not on Spotify. It is on Audius. We can drop a link for you guys to go and check it out.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Ray, how about you? What's it going to take for you to divest from the work life and get into the metaverse full time?
Well, it's been many years since 2016 that I feel like I've already been full-time crypto, but just the equivalent in dollars or revenue stream wasn't matching the amount of time I was investing during the early years of starting. But now, even though we're in a sea of red today, there's been a strategy that was laid out, and just like Jess was saying, the same thing applies with your life. So a fixed number depends on, I think, your location. I plan on traveling to Puerto Rico in March and learning more about zero capital gains taxes. So that's the route that I'm on at this point in my life. So I look forward to it. But within my means, here in New York City, a couple $1,000s a month. Modest life.
And that's pretty reasonable, frankly, for play to earn gaming and passive income. There's people making
Absolutely.
that right now.
Yeah.
Right. Which
just
is
from one
fantastic.
game. Yeah, just from one game. If you did a whole scholarship, 100 scholars, even 50, you can make close to 1,000 or more a month, and that could cover a lot. So.
Yeah, and as we know, that goes up and down with the state of the market, like Jesse shared earlier. But at the end of the day, if you, in my belief, my personal opinion, if you're working towards that, you plan for that, right? I mean, you plan for the ups and the downs. Fancy, how about you?
So I know most people would be willing to take a pay cut just because of the fact that it's a 24/7 system. If you're going to work 40 hours a week, that'll be like 4 or 5 days, depending on how many hours you do. But if you're in the play to earn space, you're there 7 days a week, even if it isn't that engaging.
Well, I'll be a bit more forthcoming with a specific number because my wife and I have had this conversation. How can I get her to let me stop working a day job? And it's ambitious, but in my mind, if you set a target, if you want to get someplace ambitious, you have to set a target. So I'm looking at a minimum $500 a day passive income to just walk away from it all. But we would like to see $1,000 a day passive income, which it's ambitious and we're not there yet, but we hope to get there. Also joining us today, the Newt of Chaos, the prophet of POLIS, ZeSSK. ZeSSK can be found on Medium writing about Star Atlas, and he can be found on Twitter at Jojo Crypto Quest. He is also a very popular guest on the interview circuit right now, and you can find him on Discord. ZeSSK, how are you doing today, and what is your number to go full-time into the metaverse?
Hello, citizens of the eternal city of Rome. Thank you, Angels, for having me today. I'm so glad to be here with my friends from Rome. Well, here in Brazil, we don't need to be so ambitious to have a comfortable life. And that's a really interesting feature about the metaverse. If we had like $50 a day here in Brazil, you can live a comfortable life with your family. And that's one of the interesting things about the metaverse. We'll break the political, economical borders of our own countries and be able to be part of the same world economy. It will let us access more developed markets like the global markets instead of our regional problems with our tokens, inflation. The Brazilian currency is really in a bad spot right now. So I'll be glad if I can get, 10 polis a day. I would say 10 polis a day is a good number for me.
Nice.
Well, cheers to your goal. I think you'll get to it before I do. And I'm glad that that's going to work out in your benefit. I think one of the benefits of living internationally is you do, as Jesse said, you can take advantage of different cost of livings that work in your benefit. Ray in New York City is going to have to make a lot more to have the same quality of life than in other places. So ZeSSK, before we get into kind of your writings and your thoughts on Polis and some of the other things within the Star Atlas Metaverse, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into crypto and play to earn gaming.
Sure. Well, I'm Brazilian. I am 31 years old, and I have always been fascinated about gaming, analysis. I work at the day as a lawyer and at night as a chaos newt. So I always enjoy analyzing and writing and crafting theories about the games that I love. And it always bothered me that I couldn't be actually part of the market. In traditional gaming industry, all the profits reverts for the company. And when I learned last year about Solana and Star Atlas, which I saw in a random ad, I was like, a game that lets you own property and have lots of tiers of complexity in terms of politics and economicals, I need to check that. Then I saw Atlas Theory content in YouTube, and the guy started to describe my dream game, and I was like, okay, I need to learn about that. So he's saying, hello, Aaron, how you doing, man? He's talking here in the chat. So yeah, I just had to learn about it, to study, and nowadays I spend like 6 to 8 hours a day reading and crafting theories about Polis.
That's fantastic. So you let us know you're from Brazil, and we know that Brazil has a pretty large Star Atlas following that's been developing both from a player and a scholar perspective. Are you writing in your primary language too? Can they find you anywhere in your first language?
That's actually a thing that I'm starting doing now. I have just started to translate all my articles, and I'll be posting them on my Medium as well. having started to engage with the Brazilian community in order to spread awareness there. We have a really big guild in Brazil, two big guilds actually, NFT Gaming and Brazilian Star Alliance, which I guess are the biggest guilds in Star Atlas at the moment in terms of numbers of players. And I'll try to help them come up with ideas and awareness to spread this to our community in Brazil as well.
Fantastic. And I think education is such a big piece of this industry, not only crypto, but also as we get into play to earn gaming. And you shared privately your thoughts on being in a guild. And I know that a lot of people are wondering if you're in a guild. Can you share your thoughts?
Sure. As we were discussing earlier, I have always thought about this question. Should I join a guild? What should I do? And I realized that if I joined a guild, I would be biased. I would start to write thinking, even if I wasn't aware about this, but I would always strive to gain some kind of advantage or don't be neutral in my analysis on a certain particular topic. So I decided that in order to build an utopia and to remain neutral and objective, I wouldn't join a guild until this desire is fulfilled.
And that brings up an interesting dilemma for you, right? Because we know that Star Atlas is largely going to be, and we're going to get into this, it's going to be a game of well, I'll just say conquest. Those are my own words. That require large groups to work against other groups. And for an individual player, that might be more challenging to accomplish. So what do you hope to accomplish in Star Atlas, both personally and collectively?
That's a really interesting question. And I don't actually think that I'm playing as an individual player. Like today, we are here discussing knowledge and spreading awareness, and we are building our trust. I have been talking up with Fancy a lot in Discord, and we are always having fun together, discussing theories. Maybe I'm the player who plays with the biggest group in the whole Star Atlas because I have friends in all the factions, all the dolls. We have lots of fun together, and I'm sure that together we will build something very remarkable in our game.
To that end, I think, and we've discussed this before, I think there's an opportunity for a group of individuals to be factionless as much as they can and guildless as much as they can and set themselves up as the arbiters within the metaverse. Build the trust with many different factions, many different DACs, and allow this trusted group to settle disputes.
That's a really interesting topic, Banjo. Actually, maybe we'll see the rise of tribunals, of a justice system in Star Atlas. There is so much possibilities in this field.
As it stands right now, we really don't yet know what the limitations or the benefits are of being factionless or going multi-faction. Now, it has been said that you're going to want to pick a faction and there will be consequence. And the only one that I think we're hyper aware of is that at some point, items within the game will be locked to a location. So, but for right now, for staking chips, and we don't know what that's going to mean in the crafting portion of scores that comes out. But at some point down the road, if you are in multiple factions, you might find that the cost of transferring goods across deep space is going to be prohibitive to that model. But who knows? It may give people a head start by having access to resources that are only available in specific regions.
Ray, did you have some thoughts? I thought I saw you about to talk there for a second.
Yeah. So I love this. As I was listening through all of the articles that our friend here, Noot, created, which took me on a journey and made me buy more Polis. Every time I listen to one of your articles, I just scoop up a little bit more Polis every time. But to the topic at hand that we're talking about, there was a quote that I took from one of your articles, and it reads as you can see, my dear readers, there will be two types of players in the game: those who get to decide and those who suffer the consequences of the decisions. It's up to you to find your crew. So that really resonated with me because, depending on what your strategies are, whether you're going to do a multi-faction guild, have alliances or not, or just stick to one faction and not choose a crew as you're talking about yourself, it's really going to be an interesting development along the way, as there might be major consequences in the beginning for your actions or your decisions, and then along the way it gets better, or you might just be the best right out the gate, and then it kind of falls apart as you go. But I just it's a pretty interesting thing to think about.
So,
Yeah,
so
it's
Zes, oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry. Yeah, I think that's a very rich world of possibilities, right? And we are all like walking the mist with a little candle on our hands. We can only see so far in the what Michael and friends have stored for us, you know. And with these many possibilities, I guess that the police is the key to unlock, you know, all those high end content in the game. And we'll talk about lots of this stuff today. I'm so excited to start delving deep into the dolls.
Well, we're excited to have you, ZeSSK. You know, what caught our eye internally with the Nomads is your Medium articles on Polis, and you take a very deep dive and get into some theory crafting on the token, which is one of the things that we love to do together, both on the podcast and off the podcast. So we're going to jump into what that looks like here. Let's bring up some slides, and we kind of prepared some things based on your writing that we kind of go through and discuss. So the first thing that you talk about with Polis is the history, and maybe you can give us some thoughts on why they chose the name that they did and what you learned.
Sure, that's a really interesting topic, you know, because when the Greek state started to organize themselves in a political manner, most of them, especially Athens, started to commit with a direct democracy. A direct democracy is characterized by the citizens who actually have a civilian status are able to vote directly in the laws and movements that the police, the city, will make. And in the DAOs of Star Atlas, we'll actually do that. In real world, we elect representatives and they vote on the subjects. It's like we give them a blank letter to talk in our names. In Star Atlas, this will be different. We'll be the ones to vote on the propositions and the future and motions of our own regional DAOs. And that's really interesting because we are actually responsible now. You know, we don't have politicians to blame ourselves, to blame. We don't have someone to share the burden of our decisions. And it's actually even more interesting because we are putting at stake our capital, our money. When we are talking about Star Atlas, we are talking about our real money, our assets, and that makes our responsibility even more important in this scenario.
You know, what's interesting is in the real world, politically, we do the same thing, but we do it through taxes. And we do have representative government. And, you know, different people have different thoughts on democracies. Do you have any concerns with kind of the thought that democracy is the wolves voting against the sheep?
That's a really interesting question. And it's one of the things that we'll have to wait to see in Star Atlas. In some of my articles, I discussed how many polis would you need to be a relevant citizen. Of course, most of it is speculation, but I think that in the level of the regional DAO, which will be the most important for the common player to participate, to engage, and to learn about, everyone that actually has won a good stack of polis, and maybe it's like 200 polis, 300 polis, will actually have a kind of weight in the decisions. Viticus brought us, we'll see, I'm spoiling the slides, but we'll see later, some really interesting reasonings and possibilities about the number of regional DAOs, of landowners, and you'll see that even the small man can make the whole difference in an important decision about the polis. And maybe in Star Atlas, your vote will actually has much more impact in the small community that you live in the regional DAO.
Well, that's a fantastic point. That there are other people who talk about politics that they only really work when you're at the local level, and that describes a regional DAO as you're writing about it. where you start to lose some of that personal accountability the higher up you go in any political organization. I think that's a fantastic perspective. So, we know that there's 360 million Polis. We know that it's a fixed, it's a finite number. There's not going to be any additional. There's no use cost with it. Like a ship, you have to have the 4 R's. We know it's going to generate passive income, and we know it's going to be used for governance. As you started to write the papers that you and put your thoughts down to paper, what surprised you about Polis? What made you excited, and what are some of your higher level concerns?
Well, when I first read about Polis, I thought that it needed a nerf, because in the Star Atlas system, Polis works in almost every kind of level of gameplay you can think of. When you think about a ship, for example, the ship will have a specific class, like he's a fighter. He'll do fighting, he'll destroy and be destroyed. Yeah, like the Persex 6. he just has this one specific function in the Star Atlas Metaverse. When we are talking about Polis is actually law instrument, a representation instrument on 3 different levels of governance. Polis can be used as soft power in terms of making impossible for your opponents to start a war. It can be used as a economical leverage. For example, you can do taxation on the whole planet if you have more Polis than your neighbors together. So let's say, for an example, you want to dominate one regional system. You have a big capital of Polis. You buy one parcel of land and you start to tax the whole mining operation of the planet. You do the importation and exportation taxes to 500%, This will make the region economical weak. And the fuel price will rise since they will need to buy it from other places and bring through the logistic industries, So Polis has so many different types of use that it almost seems unfair with the other assets in game. And when I first read the economical paper and I started thinking about this of categories of use of Polis, I was mind blown.
Fantastic.
Another thing that I would like to discuss about the total supply of Polis is that there is a really tiny expression in the economic paper saying that a supermajority of votes could vote on the total supply of Polis. So it is possible that if we had someone big enough to trigger this kind of vote, that the supply of Polis could actually be reduced, and that might be even a 300 IQ play for someone who already owns lots of Polis and tries to gather more political power in game.
Mm-hmm. And I think through the course of this conversation, we might identify those areas where that might be a risk. And maybe from a theory craft perspective, we talk about how you can prevent that.
Yeah, sure.
So basically what you're describing is, you want it all and you want it now. And honestly, based on the conversation we talked about earlier, now's the right time to buy Polis, right? Because we have a little downturn in the market. It's relatively inexpensive. People who are new to crypto are probably freaking out. People who've been around crypto for, 3 to 5+ years understand that this is cyclical. But I think a number of people in the Star Atlas Metaverse are absolutely buying up what they can when it's cheap.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to acquire your Polis.
So
I think that
go ahead, Jesse.
With regards to big movers and shakers, I think one of the things that's important to acknowledge is that private sale makes up a big portion of who will own Polis. And so that basically throws a very influential force into the mix that for the most part is anonymous. And so I do have concerns about that. One of the things that I liked in your article is you were talking about how Polis as a governance token is your way to basically stake your claim to the project as a whole, to take on some of the risk with the Star Atlas team of the project itself, pushing towards the success of the project. But if I was doing that in any other project, I'm going to be concerned if there's this big, huge chunk of influence. And that is, I mean, and it extends further out to about 2026 before we even, when I say we, the people even catch up to how much influence that private portion of Polis has. That to me is a concern just because it's an unknown.
Yes, they are the wild card of the police game, right? We don't know who they actually are. And they have like what, 22% of the police supply. I think they have a vesting period of 104 weeks as well, same as the team, but you're actually right. What if those private buyers are actually players, you know? And will they engage in the regional and faction DAO voting, or are they only concerned about, staking and gathering profits from the project? Will they be allowed to play as players? That's something that we should actually ask in the foundation room to Michael when we have the chance. That's a very interesting point you just pointed out.
Well, this is something we brought up previously in the foundation room, and it wasn't met with the greatest of open arms. I'll say that much. I think with any game, you start to have the crowd that is objective and looks at things critically, and then you have the people who are completely fanboyed, and nothing can go wrong. But I think Jesse is spot on that we have to know or understand the ability of the investor class to influence what's going on in the metaverse, or are they just going to stake it and earn a return on it? I'm okay with that. But
Right.
if you've got people who aren't invested in the actual metaverse itself, meaning the goings on, then and they're influencing that, then I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's this perception in a lot of projects that anything called into question is just FUD. And there's such a thing as asking rational, reasonable questions. And when I look at this orange compared to this gray, this charcoal down here in the bottom, and I see that it doesn't even begin to even out until the year 2026, 4 years into the project, I want to know who has all this influence and what it's going to mean for something that I'm investing in, both my time and my money.
Yeah, especially in the long term. And, I could only, a positive that I could think of is that these individuals who are private, holders of Polis, they're groups or entities or individuals that have an interest in the success of Star Atlas. And I don't think they would just sell off right when they actually get any amount or the full amount eventually on any moment's notice. But again, we just don't know enough.
Yeah. And in that case, I would say identify yourself and share your intentions.
You can come on the podcast.
You are invited.
You're invited.
That's it.
So, ZeSSK, if we could get in and, we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to start at the regional Polis governance, and then kind of go into faction and then go into the entire metaverse. Can you kind of walk us through, and you do it so well in your Medium articles, kind of walk us through some of your thoughts on the regional governance level?
Sure. When you think about Star Atlas and you think about governance, I think it's really interesting framework to think on the medieval Europe framework, political framework, the feudalism. In feudalism, the big powers as Rome had fallen in the Occident, the chaos was spread, and small territories started to organize themselves in order to function. You had those little shires with the local feudal lord ruling and establishing how life should be lived. And the central governance was weak. The king or the figure of the leader was not able to control strongly the outer borders of the feudal lords. They were the law actually in their territories. And when you think about Star Atlas, you think of each faction. You should not look at it as a monolithic structure. You actually need to look to the planets. to the smallest political organization that will grow into the sub-regional DAO, to the faction DAO, and then you can start talking about the metaverse DAO.
Hmm.
So what can one do on the lowest level of political organization? And we need to actually make a point here because this is the most important uh, political structure for the common player, you know? Where you live, who rules your oh my not who who rules your political instance, your planets? It will be a huge factor in your success in the game, you know. As I explained in one of my articles, you could start thinking, well, if I am playing a news tour, if I manage to acquire blueprints from the mute from Pierce corporations, from the Pierce manufacturer, I could try to be one of the few guys who have the expertise to sell mute chips, and people love those C11. You know,
Yeah.
people buy lots of them, and you start and you grind all the fame, all the reputation required to acquire the blueprints, and you get set to start your factory going full strength. You even borrow Atlas from the markets, make a huge investment, and the sub-regional down starts a war with the mood territory. And then he says, no freaking mood commodities in my kingdom. Taxation, 99.9%. Well, you're just screwed. You wasted your
Yep.
time, you borrowed capital, and you can't do a thing with your business plan.
Right.
So the common player, if he wants to survive the waves of politics and economy in Star Atlas, needs to be aware of what's happening in his regional governance DAO.
Yep.
And the economical paper isn't exhaustive, but he gives us a few examples of what a regional governance DAO can do. The main topics will be the local taxation and local policies. As the slide shows, the regional governance will be able to establish taxes for your products, from activities to importation. Like if you want to buy, as this example I use, if you want to acquire goods from other factions, everything will be decided by the regional governance DAO. And at this point, we start to see some very interesting things that's going to happen in Star Atlas because, well, we have this regional governance down here, but there is a neighbor under the same faction, you know?
Hmm.
Not one neighbor, but like maybe hundreds of them. And
Yeah.
every regional down will be fighting for resources, people, armies. It will be a competition, not just against the other factions, but at the level of your own uh, faction down. You see? So it will be like the counters and weights theory. If you go too far on taxation, people will leave your regional down for a regional down which provides you with better incentives to live, to produce, to acquire wealth. On the other hand, if you don't tax people at all, how you fund your army, how you fund the DAO protection, how you start to develop projects. And we are not even talking about the next level, that is the relationship between the regional DAO and the faction DAO. Because the faction DAO will be the big owner of capital in Star Atlas, you know? And the big guilds, and in my article I say the big boys playground, will fight to death to acquire the resources of the big faction DAO.
Yep.
And the big faction DAO will have the discretionarity to allocate capital in the DAO that they want. And we'll get there later at this discussion, but those are huge advantages of owning this war machine of the faction DAO.
I have a couple of questions while we're talking about the differences between the different DAOs. So we can see that at the faction level, we've got the 3 factions that have the 3 DAOs. And then below that, we have the regions. We don't know exactly how many regions are going to be in each faction. So that's still a big question mark. The question becomes is, what is the influence of the faction DAO versus the regional? We talked about some of the things that the regional DAOs can influence, but is this to function similar to the factions being like the federal government and the regions being like a state? Can the faction overrule some of the things that are being decided within the regions? Like, what is that role between them and how does that play out?
That's a really interesting question, and the economical paper just refers to one case of these different levels of government interaction. The faction DAO is actually allowed to vote on maximum taxation. You know, the upper limits of taxation on the regional governance. Aside from that, we have the Star Atlas DAO. And I think that one of the main votes that will happen in the Star Atlas DAO will be to set the rules about what the faction DAO can actually vote on regarding the sub-regional DAOs, you know, like establishing the competences of each governance level of power. I think that if not the Star Atlas team starts work on that, one of the first things that we'll need for, you know, to don't go into full chaos mode is to establish this kind of limits from the regional DAO, faction DAO, and Star Atlas DAO governance. But we'll see that we have a few defined competences for each of them. The regional DAO is like they can rule on a lot of stuff, but they are limited to their territory. And the faction DAO is kind of more abstract in their powers and competences. In the regional DAO, we'll mostly see that the regional can pay dividends for the invest. They can't share the profit, which is very important because if this was allowed, we will see people actually buying regional DAOs in order to acquire income.
Mm-hmm.
But they can rule on things like establishing missions for the player in the regional DAO, which is very interesting. They can hire, they will be responsible for defining the military army of the regional DAO and other policies in the territory of the region.
You know, when we talk about the regional DAO and the influence that we'll have, and then the question becomes, like you just mentioned, that someone buying the regional DAO, like someone becoming an influencer to such a degree that there could be a single guild that all of a sudden becomes a dictator to some degree. And I'm curious if that is something that can actually happen, because I think that even though the regional DAOs are the lowest tier of influence for the lowest DAO, essentially, it still is a lot of people and a lot of planets. And I don't know if now is a good time. What do you guys think? That just to show a couple of slides as to what actually makes up a region.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
perfect time.
And so I had put some slides together that essentially ask that question. You know, like right now we know there's 3 factions. We don't know how many regions there are going to be per faction. We also don't know how many planetary systems are going to be per region, or even how many planets will be in a planetary system. But with that said, we do know that it's been said, and again, this is just some of the lore. These things can change at any time. But it is believed that a planet will have up to 64 land plots. Some may be smaller, but I don't know if any will be larger. So imagine we're looking at half of a planet right here with 32. So that one plot, if you ended up buying one piece of land, in one of our last shows, we talked about some of the lore that we heard, the potential for land being even as low in cost as an extra small ship, an extra, so $20 or something like that. So does that mean that if you can get a land plot for $20, that there's going to be a lot of land? So let's say that we go with this model. We've got 64 land plots on a planet. How many planets are going to be in a single planetary system? Could be a lot. Is there going to be 10? I mean, if we think of it in terms of the solar system, the average solar system has, I think, somewhere between 5 and 10 planets per star, like that, as our sun is. So let's, if in this case, I think we're looking at 18, but could there be 10? Could there be 5? And from there, how many different planetary systems are there going to be in a region?
Right.
So if you are influencing an overall regional DAO like this here, are you talking about 100 planets? Are you talking about 50 planets? And based across that, I mean, are guilds owning whole planets? Are they owning multiple planets? So when we're even thinking in terms of a region is a lot of influence, especially in early game. And I think it could be a while before we see any specific guild having so much influence that they're able to fully dictate what goes on within a region. Again, from a faction level, how many planets, how many regions, how many planetary systems are we going to find within a whole faction? A couple other things I have to just kind of illustrate that point is 64,000 land plots. Let's just say that was how many and this is all theory crafting, of course, but how many plots that the Star Atlas said, hey, you know what, that's what we envision for how many land plots we're going to have out there. Well, that would be roughly 1,000 planets. And if we place 10 planets in a planetary system, that would give us 100 planetary systems. And then we'd end up with 5 regions in 5 regions per faction. So that's one potential model. That means that a DAO would basically, for a region, would be looking at something like that. Mm-hmm. The other model is if we only said there's 24,000 land plots. Well, maybe that's spread across 375 planets, across 36 planetary systems if each system had 10 planets. And that could potentially be spread across 12 regions. Which would give us something like 4 regions per faction. So again, these are all big question marks that we don't exactly know what that looks like, but at least gives us an idea of scale for how big a region of governance could actually be. So we don't know. A region could be as small as 3 systems that each have 30 planets and have 1,900 land plots. So that's a potential right there. So we just don't know, but it helps to think in terms of how many land plots out there, how many planets, how many planetary systems, how many regions make up each faction, because that region is the lowest form of governance. So I just thought it was helpful to throw that in here at this point.
Yeah, that was amazing, Jess. Thanks for that. And, I pull up KNAT, shout out, man. So we've heard that planets can be destroyed. If one planet is destroyed, you lose your land plot. Does a new planet take its place somewhere else? So Wagner has mentioned that there needs to be productivity on your land plots. And if you can't pay the taxes on these land plots, then you essentially lose that land plot. So it's going to really come down to a lot of managing on a logistics, but then on a very small, like almost individual level or small groups. And, there's going to be a lot of interchanging of ownership between plots and planets and these bigger players with POLIS, to get to the questions soon, KNAT, but these bigger players with POLIS that are going to eventually get theirs within 4 years gives enough time, I guess, this is the way I'm thinking about it, for guilds who are serious about the game, who want to be around and help develop the game, to have control and build out whether a regional faction or a DAO faction, or to buy more POLIS, because the intent is not to sell it off when there is a boom in the market, and to help build out the game. So if a planet can be destroyed, not necessarily. I think there's going to be a finite, or maybe not. I don't know if we know that or not. Because if there's going to be a finite amount of planets, then there's that fighting that takes place of destroying a person's resource or mining rigs to then acquire it and then start building out, and then to remineralize planets. Then that's going to be a thing. I don't know if you can destroy a whole planet, but you won't be able to get the resources from that planet. They might be depleted, and then you could remineralize it with the same one, or you could I don't know that.
Do we imagine that the planet would be limited to the deep space zone rather than zones 1 and 2?
Yeah,
I don't
seems quite simple, really. Just where you'd place it, really. And we get this comment brought up in stream: destroyed. It can mainly just go away by using up all the materials on it.
Right.
So yeah, it's quite interesting to think if planets can be destroyed, but I doubt it. It's really
Well, I think
gone.
the other thing we have to consider that's been said is the DAOs really only happen. They don't happen in the high risk zone. I mean, that's Wagner's pretty much said that there will not be some level of governance that shows up there. It really is a free for all. But ZeSSK, what are your thoughts so
I-
far on what we've been saying?
I have found that those slides very interesting and kind of worrying when we think about the power of police, because, well, for to be part of the regional DAO, you actually only need to own one land parcel, and to, of course, to have police staked in the regional DAO. As Jess was saying, can we imagine a kind of dictatorship happening in Star Atlas? Well, I think there is actually a big possibility due to the emission pool rewards on the policy staking. Uh, Actually, this is right the correct slide that I wanted to talk about right now, because 40% of the whole poly supply will actually be paid to the ones who already owns policies. Let us say, for example, if we who already owns the policy, as soon as the DAO staking starts, only those who staked those policies will get access to those 40% policies that is in reserve for the mission pool. And if you think about that, that's actually a big chunk of investment. And if you think that the private investors already have 22% of the policy supply, if they are actually staking the policy, they actually have their hands on lots of potential policy strength, like 62% of the policy total supply would be actually in the hands of those investors if they actually owned all the policies in the market. And maybe, just maybe, there are some guilds or DAOs that are actually thinking about constructing their lore and missions in game to actually be villains, you know? Because this is the kind of content that attracts some kind of people. We have, and I'm not talking here about pirate DAOs. I'm actually talking about people who want to be like the Empire of Star Wars, like Darth Sidious, unlimited power, and start conquering this world. This is a full possible. This is an idea that one guy actually talked with me before. I will not name him. He is a member of our Discord. That he actually is thinking about starting something like that, and I was kind of shocked because this real money from real people, and you are thinking about starting a dictatorship in a game, but it will have impact on people's lives. And I was like, it's surprising, but it's also interesting at the same point. How will the community react to a kind of stuff like that? We don't know, but it makes the game more complex and more interesting thinking about this kind of possibilities.
Well, I think you're onto something, and I think there's a lot of people who have this idea that there'll be an egalitarian society within the metaverse. But often we've talked about looking at other games as proxies for what's going to happen, and even guilds with the best of intentions, who put their best foot forward, could turn into that empire type of environment, and become tyrannical. And then the question becomes, how tyrannical can they be? Do they have a lock on power, or can they be influenced against either through the political side or through the in-game side? And I know in Eve, there's been some major wars that have happened because of this type of dynamic that we're talking about now.
And if you think about it at the macro level, at some point, Star Atlas is designed to trigger a war, because there is the faction space, and they have two borders. On one side is one of the other factions, and the other is the other faction. And when you start going to the middle, you go to the medium risk zone, you go to the high risk zone. But at some point, there will be no place to expand but the other factions' territories. And there will always be more people joining the game, more people looking to acquire new assets. new territories, and there will be people trying to preserve their own lands and earnings. So at some point, if we don't have a real strong leadership, war is bound to happen in a large scale to accommodate the interests of the new player base hungry for the share of our universe, you know?
Wait, you bring up an interesting, well, maybe I just thought of the idea while you're talking based on what you said, but it would be interesting to see a representational government that starts at the regional level, where if you're a regional DAO leader, if you will, that entitles you to a vote at the faction level. And then at the faction level, if you're a player there, that entitles you to a vote at the metaverse level. It seems like that might stop some of the issues that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because that's exactly what happened in feudalism. You know, as soon as the warring states started to get out of control, the central power was growing. So maybe we'll see this kind of movement happening also in Star Atlas. Like maybe we'll start to build coalitions and starting to nominate representatives from the regional DAOs to decide things on the faction DAO level, which in turn bring things to the Star Atlas Metaverse. Like there will be a whole new game only for the police citizens to play. If you don't want to go space and destroy ships, you can actually play as an ambassador, a diplomat, a lawyer, like we were talking earlier. We could start a justice system in Star Atlas. The cool thing is that it's all open possibilities for us. We will decide how the game will play out at the end of the game, at the end of the day. And that's what makes Star Atlas so interesting. It's like a real expression of the human nature without the bounds of the physical world, you know? And that's just awesome, in my opinion.
The one thing I think may be a little bit different within Star Atlas is when we think in terms of governance, like if we all of a sudden we had a country and our objective was to run this country in the best way possible for the people, we're doing it for the people. Star Atlas is staged in such a way that it's staged specifically for conflict. And so I don't see too many people utilizing governance for the betterment of all. I see them utilizing governance for self-interest. And so I think that is going to take on a different model than what we might see. I mean, yes, we see a lot of that already in the real world.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
And all that sort of thing. But at least that way, it's in the real world, it's under the guise of doing it for the people. I don't think there's going to be any of that within Star Atlas.
You think the faction, the DAOs will say, we are doing this for our people, our profits, and that's it, deal with it, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be for the collective, like everyone that exists in that region. It's going to be whoever has the vote for what the special interests are that can serve them best.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that, Jesse. I think there are some people, and we know them and consider them close to us, who have a different point of view on how they're going to approach the metaverse. But I'm of the mindset that human nature sneaks into everything. And we know human nature through the lens of history. And if that shows up in the metaverse, then we are in for some interesting times.
Yeah, and this discussion gets really interesting when we start to consider that there will be lots of big multi-faction DAOs. And with their own interests in the three factions, and trying to mediate the branches and the faction interests and their own pockets and interests and their own player base interests. And we'll see lots of conflicts among those instances of power, you know?
Speaking of power and guilds and factions, right now, Polis is at $2.62. So we've got, and we've heard that Titan ships, could go at auction for as much as 5 million. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So what is, if a guild right now was saying, look, we've got $5 million, are we better off with a Titan ship or 2 million Atlas? I mean, 2 million Polis? Which one serves you better?
That's a really interesting question. And if I were to answer that, I would say if they bought all this money on Polis, they would likely, at the present moment, take in consideration that the Polis reward curve starts bigger now and goes declining over time. So the big chunk of the 40 be paid at the beginning of the policies taken down, I would say that they would probably own a big piece of the Star Atlas Metaverse through this policy.
It's interesting. This conversation's coming up because it affects me personally. Having just sold our house in one state and moved to another, we have some extra money that we might want to play with. And my wife and I came to the decision that I'm going to put some into Star Atlas. And then my personal decision making was, okay, well, I do ships. Do I save some for Polis? Do I save some for mining? And my gut tells me right now where I'm at in my head is I put a large portion of that into Polis because it allows more influence. So I think a lot of people are going to be going through this decision-making process over the next 6 months.
I guess we just created Julius Caesar of the Metaverse, guys.
I am not a whale by any stretch.
You're in an interesting position or situation because a lot of people would lean towards ships simply because they can see an immediate return, as where Polis right now is a little bit more of a long-term play. But because the attention is on ships, Polis, in my opinion, is heavily undervalued. So I think the opportunity's there as you're kind of finding for yourself. So
yeah. 100%.
I
Hey,
agree.
ZeSSK, before we move on to faction-based DAOs, I do want to address some things that you wrote in your Medium articles about the regional governance, because I do think that it's going to help people understand how they'll show up. Specifically to the military protection, the internal security, diplomacy, and the budgeting. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Sure. As we know, in this framework of the feudalism in space, we'll have many actors in all levels of governance always watching each other. Everyone will know what their neighbors are doing, checking on their movements, and the regional governance DAOs will make sure to build strong foundations for their own regions. At the risk of being conquered by another foreign powers or their own neighbors. So we'll see that actually after Jesse talk about the human nature, I'm not sure how they will actually spend those their money on those policies. Maybe they'll try to fill their own pockets. But if I were a governor of the DAO, I would actually try to focus on making a real good funding for our military protection, especially for the supply routes. That's something that we were discussing earlier, that people don't actually pay attention to this kind of details. But if you are talking about those big regions in space, we are talking about if anything happens in one corner of the region, you need to mobilize a huge fleet to answer this call, to address this problem. And when we are talking about that, we are talking about fuel, we are talking about food, we are talking about ammo, we are talking about toolkits, and everything will need to be coordinated by someone. And this is the whole, let us say, of the regional governance. And if we don't have a good administration of those local policies, things will start to fall apart. And this is one of the scenarios. I don't know what you guys think about this, but I'm actually thinking that it's very possible that it will be total anarchy on Star Atlas for a good time, until we can get organized in a more or less stable order or alliances forming to actually pacify things. We'll see lots of chaos in the early days of the game.
And to that end, I think the guilds who are planning for this are going to be set up better than the ones who really aren't thinking they're this strategic. They're not going to this level. They're more worried about building a guild and getting out on Twitter and talking about all the stuff they're doing and the money they're spending. But at the strategic level, the guilds who are really in this for the long run and want to get to the end game, this is the type of thing they're talking about now. Do you think that the military protection is strictly a way to fund players in protection, or do you think there'll be an NPC component to it?
I think it works like the staking we have in Score right now. you let your fleets under the regional governance care, and you receive Atlas from the treasury from your ship staking. So they will use the staked fleets from the players of the regional DAO and pay them with the score money. I think it's gonna work something like that.
And from the homeland security perspective, the internal security, how do you imagine that showing up?
That's a really interesting topic that I would love to hear more from Michael and friends. I have read and seen lots of people speaking about espionage. It will be a major factor. We all know we don't need to shy away from this theme, but the big DAOs, the big guilds will always be targets for espionage. And it happened with me, a very interesting case that when I joined one of the guild DAOs to talk, discuss policies, etc., one of the members actually, who are you? Why are you joining our Discord? What are you doing? I was like, not.
Newt, Newt, come in peace.
Newt, peaceful Newt. I was my luck was that one of the members actually read my papers. He's the Newt who writes the articles about police. He's a friend of our guild leaders. Don't hit the Newt. He's a friend. And they let me in and we start talking but this is really interesting. This episode was really interesting for me because people are actually starting to watch their internal security. And as we know in the modern world, information is one of the strongest forms of power. And in Star Atlas, this will be especially relevant. And I talk about that a little bit in my article about policy because if you manage to deploy a fleet without being seen, and the Oni faction is really good for this endeavor, you are actually in a huge advantage due to the logistic necessary to mobilize a big fleet, as we are discussing. And if you have the correct info, if you have the correct contacts amidst the different corners of the Star Atlas Metaverse, you can actually learn lots of interesting things. If you have, let's say, you are friends with the people responsible for the freights, and they say that they saw a huge fleet coming your way, you will be prepared to do something else. You tell the regional governance, you will start to mobilize your fleets. Information is something that's, like policy, is really undervalued in Star Atlas right now. So internal security will play a major role in this front of the gameplay.
It's interesting. We know that that's playing out in Discord, and that different guilds are looking at internal security differently. I am curious for what mechanisms in game will show up for that. We kind of have a joking term for play to earn economics that are done in an offensive nature. We call them reconomics. And I think that, if you think about POLIS and how it can be used against your enemies, right? Is there a way to do that from inside the game and allow, we talked earlier maybe about large groups moving POLIS from one DAO to another, which I hope they put limitations on. But you might have a sleeper guild or a sleeper squad or something that is there for a year going along to get along and then just completely blows everything up. The intrigue is going to be amazing.
That's interesting because it's actually happening right in EV Online. Something like that actually happened. And there wasn't even real world money involved, right? So imagine in Star Atlas what kind of things and mechanics that they will implement for this kind of gameplay. I have a friend in the Star Atlas Discord that he asked me, may I be your secret agent to protect Newtopia against its enemies? My one not secret service. I was like, okay, man, when the game starts, let's check this out. You make the customs on everyone. Don't let them enter Newtopia with guns, Park your C11 far away from Newtopia, please.
Do you think there's a place for a completely non-aggression area within the metaverse?
Sure. And actually, that's my dream. Newtopia, I think that everyone has a goal, right? Playing Star Atlas. Some people play for the fun, some people want to amass political power. I want to build a real cool place for everyone to, get out of this stressful gameplay that we have been talking about the last hour. It's really stressing, when we start staking our capital and like we have those $100,000 ships going to deep space. It's scary for anyone. You may be rich, you may be whatever kind of guy you are. This is kind of stressful. Lots of people will be make their living through Star Atlas. So I think that it is important for everyone to have a place where they can, you know, breathe easily without their neighbors watching every movement they make, without the ships where someone threatening you around each corner if you make the wrong movement. I'm thinking about building Utopia right at the center to prove a point that even though we are all involved in this big war game and all, we can actually find some time to be friends and to have a laugh and spend our hard-earned Atlas and just chill a bit. Everyone, I think we need a place like that in our universe, and that's my proposition for Utopia.
I
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray.
No, I was just gonna say as we talked behind the before the show, briefly on the topic of Utopia, I just thought it was pretty interesting on how it's gonna become that peaceful of a place if the only safe zone is the first zone, and more power to you, and there's some support from Rome there, or as individuals, whoever you may be. But if you're gonna have everyone coming to a location where you can just open fire, what's that friendly fire switch on and off like? Is that going to be a possible can that be implemented? Maybe Wagner says only within this particular space of Utopia, once you enter it, there's no firing, and it's going to be that Utopia. Because if that could be done, then I guess that's the only way I think it could be done, unless, as you were talking about, friendships being the main driver of there being a non-aggressive area out in deep space.
I think there's a lot of creative ways that you could implement that. And while I speak in terms of, I see Star Atlas being a kind of a hostile environment by the very nature of how it's structured, this diamond planet and these three factions and all these, rival wars and the lore that goes along with it. But there are ways that you could make it into something else. In fact, I would love to see a vote at the highest level of DAO that says at some point in the future, DAOs and governance goes all the way down to the planetary system level. Because even within a region, if you think about how many planetary systems, how many planets are there, you might have some planets or a planetary system that is the vacation zone. And so therefore, why not set up governance and tax it in a different way? You could also do something creative, like say, hey, to enter this zone, you need to pony up a deposit. And if you become hostile in this zone, you lose your deposit. So give people incentive for behaving properly based on their wallet. There's creative things like that I think you could do to kind of create a bit of a utopia. Or if if you've got a history of this or that, you're not even allowed into the area. So, there's creative things like that I think could really make it so that you have these very different experiences in different places.
Those are very interesting points, and I would like to address Ronald's question. Like, would Utopia, trigger a kind of ruin our economy? I don't think that would be a problem, Ronald, because as I said, Utopia would be at the very center of the galaxy. So let's say you bought a C11 at Utopia. You would need to take it out of there, right? And you are at the very center of Utopia, at the very center of the metaverse, and you need to cruise quite a journey to reach a safe zone after that. So actually, it would be a big risk to acquire and do trades in Utopia. But I think that we don't need an actual mechanic for, let's say, peace. Like a friendly fire-free zone for Utopia. I was thinking about two things regarding that. First, I would have a alliance pact with the major DAOs, and I would actually pay them for the protection. For, let's say, this week, Ron will be the responsible for the protection of Nutopia. And you guys bring your phalanges and your army, and s- the whole zone of Nutopia would be covered with the armies of Ron. And the second thing is that I'm building my Newt star, which will be a Death Star, but better with Newt. And I'll deploy it right. Yeah, that's it. So when you reach the horizons of Newtopia, you'll see the Death Star, the Newt star on the horizon, and you'll think twice before steering trouble in this zone, you know? The Newt is friendly, but the Newt actually writes all those evil thinking articles about police. So I need to be able to defend myself, right? At some
Right.
level.
I think the what you're describing is peace through power, right? And which also becomes, at least if we look at the real world, it becomes a money game, and a game of influence. So it's going to be interesting. I like the idea of a rotating defense core, because that creates, I guess, more of a neutral understanding that somebody else is going to be in that position of power in Utopia, for example, maybe in a week or a month.
Yeah, I want Utopia to be, let us say, everyone is very concerned about acquiring and having power. Utopia will be, let us say, the negation of this status quo. Utopia will be strong because it doesn't hold itself power. It will be strong because it's like Switzerland, a place for people to sit together, who is always neutral, who won't involve itself in the other people's affairs, and welcome everyone for every corner of space. Even for the pirates, it will be a good place to exist because it will be one of the few places that they will be allowed to join peacefully, you know? Everyone will have a place in this neutral ground where they can actually have a good night of sleep with their assets being protected. You know?
What do you see as like the primary economy in this utopian area?
I think that will dive deep in the polis game, you know. Uh, I want every ambassador, every political agent. I want casinos. I want people with their stores in Utopia. I want it to be an area that people can actually enjoy a day, and lots of tourism, you know, like you'll be able to rent, to go with get your NPC avatars and go inside a Augrica Asterix and just fly through the different zones in space, seeing the beautiful Eugene 5 graphics in the space. Lots of leisure and places for people to hold meetings and discuss alliances, strategies, a place for diplomacy and leisure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it.
Zesk, if in your writings, and I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on this area of the faction piece, because you just put out some additional information or a new Medium article on it. But why don't we start with the faction governance piece now and kind of talk about your thoughts on how it's going to be used, how guilds or DACs or maybe even the factions are going to work together and against each other.
Well, the regional DAO is interesting enough on its own. But when you think about the faction DAO, it's like regional DAO with steroids, right? The faction governance is like a body composed of hundred, as just showed us. It could be actually formed about hundreds and hundreds of systems, and every single player in each of the land parcels will have their own desires and ideas about how this big treasure that everyone is working together to build should be used. So the big political arena of Star Atlas will be, without doubt, the faction governance DAOs. Because aside from the big heavy vaults full of polis and atlas that they will have, they can actually trigger very big movements that I called on my articles macro movements. The economical paper talks about only one of those, he's not exhaustive. He sets an example about how the macro movements could be used, and that's regarding the acquisition of territory in Star Atlas. Uh, the economical paper talks about how would one acquire a land when they start a war, and how could the faction governance impacts in the said war. So the faction governance actually has four kind of macro movements for now: occupy, hold, build, and patrol. My
How do you,
understanding.
how would
Sorry.
you enforce that? For example, let's say that as a faction vote says, "Hey, we're warring now, and we're going to take over and occupy this land." Let's say it's the Mud faction, and says, "We're going to take this Ooster land. We're going to occupy it." How do you enforce that? How do what if the other people are saying, "Look, I don't want to commit my ships," even though there was a vote? I mean, how does that get enforced?
That's a really interesting question because there are two in-game requirements to start a macro movement. First, there will be needed to set a quantity of polis stacked, and you need to pass the vote. So we have a majority voting on one of the sides, and we'll need some capital in form of polis stacked on the. And this is what makes interesting the situation, because there is a prize if you for the other faction if you lose. There will be structures built on ground. The economical paper states that. So maybe, and this is a speculation, but I don't think it's too far-fetched from what the economical paper says. If you can actually defend against a faction macro movement, or if you actually win a war, there will be a prize to be won to be gathered by the winning side of the conflict. And this is why I think that faction macro movements will mobilize the whole, if not the whole, a large portion of the players in the faction DAO, because there will be blood in the water and money to be made, you know?
So the incentive is the reward for participation.
So I think with the reputations and factions, if on like the regional scale you set a goal of we're gonna take this, there would be like the reputation incentive. It'd be like a quest in it, like in itself.
Yeah, for sure, you acquire reputation with your faction, and maybe the most important part of this is that you actually acquire land for yourself, you know? If you are part of these war efforts, there will be a whole new solar system with lots of land parcel to distribute among your allies. So let us say that Rome starts a war, and you guys are actually successful and captures an entire solar system. As we saw in the other slides, there will be each planet will have 64 parcels of land, and you guys will distribute those spoils for your core supporters who actually fought in the war with you guys. So it's like a self-feeding system. You start the engine of war, you acquire new lands, you reinforce people support to your cause through land giving, through Polis and Atlas paying. You get stronger and you start the next war. That's why in my articles I said that the faction DAO is so very important, because they are actually the biggest and stronger uh, structures of war in Star Atlas. And as we saw in the macro movements, each of those macro movements will give buffs for the fleets fighting the conflicts, you know? So we'll actually get stronger, and the victory might be more achievable if you have the support of your faction in that war. And that's another point that's very interesting, and we need to consider very well, very carefully, because when one faction issues a macro movement, it's like they shot the first, let's say, the first ammunition of their weapon, because there's so many movements a faction can make at a set period of time. So if let's say the Mute started a Occupy movement against the Ustur, the Onis are watching, and they know that the Mutes have one less macro movement to make. So they might be vulnerable in the borders between the Oni and the Mute faction, you know? So it will be like a big chess board being played by thousands of people at the same time. Most of the people will not be even aware of what's happened. They will just war and join and go with their fleets. But the ones that own the big capital, the ones that holds the police, who are actually responsible for the movements of the faction down, they will be like very carefully studying each and every movement made by any of the factions, because if you have more macro movements, you can give more buffs to your troops. You can strategize and mobilize your fleets in a more efficient manner. On the other hand, if you have the first mover movement, you may get your opponents without any preparation. So you might even blitz them up and capture their territory before they can ever respond to your attack. And this is very fascinating for me. Another thing that I would like to point out is that the acquisition of territory will not be quick at all. In the economical paper, we see that the how the acquisition of territory works. Okay, let me explain. You first, can we go back to the previous slide?
Sure, a moment.
Sure. When you, let's say that we decide to conquer one land, we'll need to first occupy the territory. It will trigger an event in Star Atlas, and this territory will be considered contested territory. There are 4 steps until you are from occupying to conquer the territory. And you need to hold the, let us say, there will be a victory factor involved of somehow, let us say, if you control X planets in the system, you start to gain victory points. I don't know. This wasn't disclosed yet. But there will be some kind of account
Reward.
for that. Yeah, rewards in this calculation. You need to every step of the acquisition of the solar system, of the star system, will take 2 weeks. And since there are 4 steps, you can imagine that even in the best case scenario, it will take a whole 2 months for us to conquer a territory. And that makes what we are talking about, the macro movements, even more important, because when you are doing this macro movement, you are locked in a 2 months war on that territory, at least. People can, push you back for 1 week, and then you have to start the whole week process again. We don't know how this will play out, but what the economical paper implies for us is that this might happen. So each movement will need to be very careful considered, because you will be locked, your faction will mobilize their fleet to that point in space, and all your other borders, all your other territories might suffer from that concentration of troops.
There's the other side of that too. So let's say that in the Oni faction, that there is a faction vote that goes to war. And so based on that, there's probably now some reward system, some things that can be earned from participation. But if we know that this is going to be a several-month occupation, as a guild, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to allocate the resources required, and are those resources allocated going to be worth the rewards that we receive? In addition to that, the other question I have is, how is loot dispersed? If there is land, there's things like that. Is it a round robin system, or is it someone doling out? Is it the Dow body, the faction doling out the spoils of war? So I think there's a lot of considerations, and just because there is a vote to go to war, I think each individual participant is going to have to decide for themselves: is the time for us to do it? Is it worth it? Do we have the resources?
And I think about the DAOs that every member is going to be a part of, majority of individuals, and then what proposals are set in place to be voted on to do this. to actually send a fleet? What if half of the people don't want it to happen, and then but it's also kind of necessary? And like, what are the inner workings and struggles that are going to take place, which are going to have people leave guilds to join others, or maybe just abandon everything and go to Newtopia because it's just like, I don't want to deal with all this chaos and all these people who think they know what they're doing in the guild versus how much money, which is dictating the decisions instead of the actual community votes. So.
Well, this goes back all the way to ZeSSK's comments on feudalism, and you know, in those times, you went to war based on conscription, right? You really didn't have a choice, and
Right.
and once your faction votes for war, it might unlock some things from buffs and bonuses on both sides that creates conflict outside of the intent of war. So let's say, you know, the war is over here, you're mining over here, but this faction now has a buff on attack or something. So they might be more inclined to attack your mining colony that has nothing to do with this war.
Well, here's another consideration, because taxes aren't just on the money itself. You can tax a percentage of production of something. So if you're at war, the faction might say, hey, 10% of all ore mined goes to the faction to support this effort. You know?
Right.
Yeah. And isn't that there are lots of open questions, of course, because there is no clarification on some points of our discussion. But I think that all those internal questions, like, okay, we are guilds, we are going to participate in the war. Will the members be obliged to use their capital in a faction war? How will the guild deal with this kind of conflicts? They will need to talk with their members in order to people understand their desires and what the faction and the guild desires. You know, you need to be really careful when choosing one of the guilds, because you can end up as a collateral damage from war and lose all your assets. It's entirely possible.
Well, you know, somebody in chat brought up a good point. For the guilds who don't want to get involved directly, there is probably going to be entire organizations of mercenaries who will go to fight for you on your behalf. They just want money. So sometimes, again, money shows up as a way to help influence things, even if you don't want to go to war directly.
We saw that in Eve with, you know, the casinos funding funding wars against their enemies.
That's awesome, man. And we have actually a few mercenary guilds already. We have lots of pirates, we have mercenary guilds. And yes, that will be a full-fledged market in Star Atlas. And I think that's actually awesome to see how those different factors will play out. We even might see assassins, you know, people who put bounties in other heads and to destroy one person in particular.
I want to share a thought on these big VCs or money that comes in that guilds are responsible for. So it's not their particular ships or bank account money that's invested into Polis or a particular ship that's going to go to war that they feel that they could sacrifice, but the accountability and responsibility of big bucks that are in the hands of these major guilds. Just because a guild shows that it has multiple millions doesn't mean that they're going to have they're going to be a force to be reckoned with when it comes to war, because these VCs want to return on their money. And if you're going to risk the ships and the assets that are going to help potentially win the war, depending on how organized your groups are to fight out a war, you know, outside of the mining rigs being at stake and, you know, abandoning the planet and what's at stake on that end, are you even allowed to do that? Like, what's the details with that contract? They want a fixed rate amount or variable, whatever it is, but you can't use these assets or these ships that are being staked under no circumstances. You know, although you'll be earning 8x rewards in deep space where all the fighting and the war is going to take place. So now that's another, like, you know, variable into the salad bowl or tomato, if you want to call it, of how a bigger guild that seems intimidating won't even partake in any war, right? They're going to do more maybe political things, Polis-wise. And then if you have everyone with big ships who are willing and able to risk it all, depending on, you know, the agreement with big money, those people would potentially win wars, because there's a black hole of money to just reinvest or to pump back in.
Right. And then there's also the consideration, let's say that you do go to war, and let's say this is a long, drawn out, costly war, and even so, you do win. you have still now positioned yourself to be a target for someone that has the resources that was not even engaged in that war to begin with. So if you had a war between, say, Mud and Ooster, and both of them are wiped out with resources after the fact, we could be like, which one do we pick off? So, I mean, you have to consider down the road, even beyond the engagements that you're involved in that immediate future.
Yeah.
Imagine how much money the insurance industry will make in Star Atlas, right?
Yeah, we've talked about that. Both on and off the podcast, is when real money gets into the insurance industry and the play to earn world, it's going to be really interesting. In some ways, it will probably solve some problems, but it will probably create other ones as well.
Yeah.
So reflection of the faction DAO, and we compare it to the regional DAO, do you have any thoughts on how people position their polis? You know, it seems to me that you'll only be able to play one game. Do you go long in regional and stay out of faction, or do the big boys play with the faction and stay out of regional? What's your point of view on that, ZeSSK?
Yes, we don't have much clarification about how you can move your capital between the different DAOs. But assuming that you have to lock your capital in the faction DAO, I think that most of the big guilds will actually have big trusts or big funding of Polish just focused on the faction governance, leaving the regional DAO to their players' own Polish reserves or something like that. I think that the multi-faction DAO especially will focus on faction governance because, well, they need to protect their assets and they are the ones more vulnerable because they have their branches very far from one another and they will need some sort of protection, and that will come as the macro movements from the faction governance. That's my opinion.
You know, what I'm gathering from this entire conversation so far is the need for some level of faction level conversation between some of the larger players, right? There has to be something where you're already talking about circumstances that could happen in the game and how collectively you're going to approach them. And I think the factions that do that work ahead of time or more robustly will probably have an advantage. You know, I know that right now that they have the UN of the Metaverse. I forget what they're called. And I see some issues there because I don't think they're being fully respectful to what's about to happen at the regional and faction level. But do you see a need for the factions to get together ahead of time?
I believe that maybe let's us say, people like Rome from a single faction guilds, it would be wise of them to join the other big guilds from their own faction, at least to establish some limits between what faction governance will look like, because the worst case scenario is when big factions, big guilds start fighting on their own factions. They will try to, the faction governance will be actually paralyzed because they won't be able to make the macro movements and they will try to undercut each other to protect their own interests.
Right.
And their opponents will be able to capitalize on that and acquire their lands and territories.
And then that's why I think the multi-faction template that many guilds are going with might be at a major disadvantage because their voice is going to be much less impactful as far as votes if they're going to divvy up what their assets are and their manpower. If we're talking polis for voting, to have any type of say, it's going to be just not enough. And they're going to be at the hands of the decisions made by those who are bigger players and holders.
And you're always going to be questioning their motives, right? When you've got a multi-faction guild who's a big player in each faction, they're always going to be suspect because now we have factions going against factions, and when you're in all of them, it's well, in my opinion, like I said, it's just going to put you up as suspect.
Right, but that's why it's great to our neat guest here, as mentioned, to not necessarily focus on one faction, but the players within that faction that you're focusing on, to build some type of communication line with. That's important.
I think another question is like, what is going to be the difference between early game, mid game, and end game? Because in the early game, you're going to have, it's like when you're playing Ages of Empire or anything else. You're setting up shop in the beginning. You're trying to gather resources. You try to build your defenses. So I don't know that that things that lean towards occupy and things like that are going to be big decisions to be made in the faction at the faction level DAO. Now that doesn't mean that there's not reason to be in that DAO versus the regional, because there might be reward opportunity. The faction DAO may decide that just to keep the DAO treasury stocked, it's going to impose whatever tax across the faction as a whole. So you may have some return on your governance that you have in there with your polis, as where at the regional level you can impact things that are probably going to be felt sooner within, depending upon how you've established the economy or how the economy is established in that region. So I think that those are some of the considerations, the risk reward, and what it does for you in that short term.
Well, can you imagine a guild who puts a lot of their polis into the faction level at the leadership, or maybe the decision-making level, and then a bunch of people within their guilds put the polis into the faction level, and even the schism that might happen there, where they become the power base because they're running the regional DAOs, where the guild might be focused on the faction. There's so much nuance here.
Yeah, it's very complex, because when you acquire the key to the treasury of a faction DAO or the regional DAO, you start giving the cards for everyone on that said governance region. You can actually make people go bankrupt if you mess with the taxation, So if you are the kind of evil guy that wants to start a dictatorship, you would strive to actually try to own a big piece of regional DAOs, or even go to the faction governance level. And the thing that, how you fight someone like that, because you can only fight polis acquiring more polis, If the guy decides he doesn't want to own any asset, or he asks a friend of him to actually own the assets without showing his name, you won't be able to fight him. You won't be able to attack him somewhere. You won't be able to attack his land or his ownings, So that's why having polis is so important for your guild and your self-protection, because only polis is able to wage war on this level of gameplay, on this governance level. And as we have seen from this talk of ours, it will impact all the levels of living in the metaverse of Star Atlas.
Well, that brings me to an interesting point based on real world versus metaverse. When we have the historical tyrannical leader in the real world, people can't just pick up and go to the next place. Right. They can't just in an instant say, okay, I'm done with you and I'm going to go somewhere else, because the tyranny has them locked into a geography, right? But now in this case, people can say, I'm done with you. And that tyrannical leader in the metaverse is only going to draw more people who are of like mind, where the unlike mind is going to move on to other things. So it is going to create a little bit of a difference in how people or human nature shows up in the metaverse.
That's a really interesting point, because, well, the only thing that I can think of that people won't be able to leave is the lands, right? If you can take your fleets as well elsewhere, but the land will be locked in the regional DAO. But as you said, it will be very different and easier to fight a tyrant in Star Atlas. And maybe we'll see some crusades on Star Atlas, and that's really interesting movement. Like maybe, if one imagine the scenario that one faction can actually decide on a king, central figure that will hold the power of decisions and etc.
A politician.
A politician. and this guy, the faction unified in a central governance, is actually a very strong piece of war, machine of war, as we are discussing those macro movements, because he won't need time to assemble troops, to vote on macro movements. No, he'll decide things on live on time and start
Yep.
doing, while the other faction need to gather the people, votes, and decide and discuss. So yeah, we might see scenarios where people try to unify one big governance in order to acquire efficiency. But this kind of movement can bring at the late point a very dark outcome of tyrannies and capital concentration. We might see the worst side of human nature maybe in Star Atlas.
So we've been talking about faction on faction war. What about the mid zone and regions, going up against other regions, guilds going against guilds? And while in that zone, you can't have ships destroyed, or they can be destroyed, but they will respawn, but you will have lost crew and probably anything that you've done to upgrade that ship. Other considerations are you pay tax on land, whether that land is producing anything for you or not. So if you're constantly going over and bombing your neighbor, you could potentially run him bankrupt because he's not able to earn the money to pay the taxes on his land, which then goes to auction and you buy that. So there are some interesting strategies that can be played out even within the mid-tier zone between guilds in the same faction.
I think there's going to be just many more skirmishes on that level than anything macro for a long time. There's going to be so many people just like in AXIE Infinity with these scholarship guilds. They came in just like there's a profit to be made, and they don't have the values as many of the beginning members who joined, or even the team themselves who are building out the game. They're just coming in to benefit and reap the benefits of 2x rewards, or 3x rewards rather, in the mid zone for doing and then pillaging everyone who's maybe not wanting to fight that often, but having to defend themselves and maybe getting pushed back into into zone 1, where they can just collect and rebuild and then you hire someone out to take care of that pesky newcomer guild who just bought a bunch of ships, had the money, and is like, hey, I want to make 3x on whatever I have to make my return within a year. So you could have periods of long just battles, just going against people who don't necessarily want to, but it doesn't matter. You're going to have a military, an organization, a structure, and enough money and leftovers in liquidity to manage it all.
There is a very interesting point that will happen mostly in the high risk zone and medium risk zone. That is the logistics fight. The supply routes for, you need to acquire the blueprints from the manufacturers, and most of them will be living in the medium and high risk zones. So if you want to acquire the resources necessary to build their ships, to acquire the crafting recipes, you need to dwell there. And the big freights, the fin bulls bringing tons and tons of ores and ships and manufactured good refined materials, they will pass through those zones. So you see mercenary guarding those huge freights across space. You see pirates attacking them. As Monty mentioned in the chat, you see people trying to lay siege on regions and planets to try to crash the economic of the said region. So actually the medium and the high risk zones, for the common player that wants to fly their ships and have some real adrenaline shot, he'll have much of fun in fighting the skirmishes and battles on the medium high risk zone, especially relating to supply routes.
Shout out to the Reapers, the best one of the great squads in Rome, who are going to be dabbling in those areas willingly, mind you.
So there's a question that popped in my mind that I think is worthy of discussion. We don't have all the answers from Star Atlas team on this, but when we talk about territory, and if we're talking about moving an Oni territory, and there's conquest from the Mud who comes in and takes it over, does that include just regional DAOs, or does that include a faction level DAO and any territory underneath it?
That's a really interesting question, which we don't have clarification to. But I believe that once you acquire the set zone, it will create a new regional DAO for your faction, and the landowners will start the votes on the regional DAO, and it will join the faction DAO of the new faction which acquired the territory.
And that's done without a vote. That's an interesting idea. Jesse?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't really know. So when I think in terms of territory being taken over, we're only talking deep space. We're talking about the bleed over. And again, I wish we really could see like what a 3D map looks like of the terrain of Star Atlas. I mean, I don't know how um, uh, when we think of that diamond planet, where does it sit? Where are the resources that are in deep space, and how are the different factions overlapped on each other? And that raises a great question. Like, so are you going to have an interest in having any land that it has the potential to kind of like drift into someone else's ownership? I mean, that ends up being extra. That's an added element of a risk. So I'm curious to what the lay of the land is going to be, and I don't have an answer until I know that.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
especially if you have a key resource or industry along that border, because then it becomes the need to actually put more effort into protecting it.
Right.
Yeah, and we need to remember that the high risk zone, the rewards in the high risk zone will be 8x the rewards on the safe zone. So yes, there will be lots of risk, but if you manage to acquire a planet that mines a rare material that gives 8x the rewards from the safe zone, you might, feel tempted to risk acquiring and fighting for that planet.
Yeah, you might be making back enough to then lose that same amount or even less, and you'll stay in the positive as you go, depending on your plan. But a fact to include here is that in the outer 8x region of deep space, it's the DAOs of Star Atlas do not apply there, as Wagner once mentioned, and it's going to be your actual DAO that you have with a guild outside of the structure of DAOs that are provided by Star Atlas. So if you don't have a DAO and no way to organize or vote on anything on the outer, deep space 8x reward space, then how do you succeed out there? You could always go off of the blueprints of what you have in the DAO for that Star Atlas applies, and it could be a complete replica. Maybe you could just create one outside of what it was already created that you made in Star Atlas. Just ideas getting thrown out there, thinking out loud. But it's a whole nother ball game when compared to second and even first zone, if this is how we're imagining it, when you get into deep space.
Yeah, there's a point of from the Ronald in the comments that he said he was 99 sure that you can actually own the territory from other factions.
Right.
You can't. I believe we need to make a difference here. There is a safe zone, and there is a, let's say, the minimum territory of one faction. The zone that it's the safe place and no one can claim that territory. But the factions including that this actually lore at the lore of at this point of in the lore, we are renting our ships for the factions in order for them to expand their territory, starting going to the medium risk zone. And there is the borders that will be able to be attacked and claimed by the other factions. So there is this distinction between the minimum territory that won't be able to be claimable about the of each faction, and their secondary influence zones, if we say like that. Those will be able to be acquired through war on this mechanism we are talking about earlier.
So ZeSSK, why don't we move back into the faction DAOs, and we'll talk about the Metaverse faction now, right? So at the Metaverse level, what are we really doing with our pull list there?
Yeah, as we can see, the faction DAO has a big spectrum of different possibilities when it comes to voting and actions, right? Uh, the the POLIS Metaverse governance is like, well, you can think of Star Atlas as all the possibilities in the game is like a canvas. You can only draw on the said canvas. Those are the given rules for a game to work on. The the metaverse governance is like the power to erase the borders from the canvas, and you can actually rewrite the rules of the game. This is the importance of this metaverse governance, and it's actually power to rewrite reality, if we needed to give an example for it. Uh, and there's lots of mechanics that are really important for our success. There's actually a very important piece of information in the white paper saying that some of the votes will be blocked for a set period of time, like inflation rates for Atlas, or they establish some required quorum for votation, like a supermajority to try to change the fixed supply of police. But at the end of the day, we all need to watch very closely the metaverse governance, because as we were discussing earlier, we have private buyers which will have lots of power in the structure of the game. And basically it's like talking about the future of our project, right? The game can be actually destroyed by the metaverse governance, so we all need to watch out really closely what's happening there.
Yeah, I get in my mind that there's a kind of a crawl, walk, run mentality, right? The devs are going to let us play around and crawl like a baby. Then maybe we'll get a little bit more leeway in what we do. And then eventually, even with them as a development team, when we start running with the POLIS DAO, we can vote them in to be the primary developer or not. But it seems to me that if they gave us that power up front, we could screw it up very quickly. With all the best of intentions, even, right? Not even as a malicious position. But the idea that maybe these investor class could only live here versus some of the 2 layers down might actually be to our benefit, where they're, if needed, they can lay into these different areas where we can vote on, but they're not really influencing the day-to-day of the game.
Leave our game alone, right?
Yeah, leave it alone.
Yeah, but actually I think that's what's really going to happen, because why would they risk their capital and their money when they can simply get their juicy dividends from the police treasury revenue?
Mhm.
And maybe we could actually see some clarification from Michael about how the different pools of governance will work with each other. Like, we'll need to stake our policies. When we stake our policies in the global pool from the metaverse governance, we'll be able to use those capitals in the regional DAO and the faction DAO. This is that's a really interesting point that we need clarification in the access room. I'll ask him later about this.
Jesse, I saw you brought something up on screen there. Do you want to share what you put up? You're on mute, man.
This is straight out of the economic paper or the white paper. I forget which, but it's just what Star Atlas describes as the real world use case for POLIS externally from the faction or regional DAOs. Basically just saying that control of POLIS will enable the gaming community to influence decision-making of the Star Atlas development team. This will follow a period of centralization of decision-making, likely 2 to 3 years of game development and balance. And at the conclusion of the centralized period, holders will be able to influence game economics, such as inflation rates, asset release schedule, game direction, and will otherwise provide some degree of ownership in the development decision-making process, which is all the things we discussed, but that just kind of gives you an idea of you are essentially shaping the future of Star Atlas as a metaverse game rather than influencing the in-game politics.
It is interesting. And for those of us who are kind of looking at the future for like a Ready Player One series of multiple metaverses that are connected, this is a good example of what kind of dialogue and conversations are going to start happening once you start connecting these other metaverses together. There's going to have to be some guardrails, and then eventually, my personal hope is that it turns into some sort of just how can I say it? I hope it turns into experiments all over the world of different types of metaverses and how people should show up and participate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be very interesting to see more Ready Player One like Easter eggs in a game.
Yeah.
Especially since like the narrative of that game is you get the keys and you own the game. So they could literally just give away Polis in the same way, really.
Pretty cool.
One of the things I'd like to see votes for at that level of governance is keeping or focus on developing a metaverse and system that allows for interoperability and connectivity with NFTs and things created from other projects. Because whoever decides to do that first is really, I think, going to make the big leap towards inviting other projects to participate. When we think of things like Meta, with Facebook, and we even saw news recently of Walmart wanting to get into the metaverse game, and Microsoft and all the things they're doing because of their very nature of how they run their business and their corporation, and having their board of directors and that influence. They're going to do what's best for them and actually try and create something that they monopolize, as where whoever creates the more open source, decentralized version of the metaverse, I think, is who's going to do well long term. And I would like to see Star Atlas stay on track for doing that.
I agree.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead.
No, please. Go.
Okay, I had a thought too for the point prior to just talking about Walmart and these big guys coming in. If anyone is not taking part in getting their name out there or building something to become some type of influence in the Star Atlas community, which is going to then further down the line play a role in in votes and influence for whether it's what my point is that the longer we develop as the guilds that we know of, the small community of guilds that we have now that we could rattle off the names of, the longer we go into this with each other, whether we're in an alliance or not, no matter the faction, the people who are coming in after the fact are going to have less of an influence and even feel like we tend to feel sometimes, or I do, where you might feel like the boat already left. So now your sphere of influence is much smaller, although you might have a lot of money. And again, many variables come into this, but the people who are going to be listened to or considered as any type, or have any type of respect in the sense of like political decisions or just like the United Nations of Star Atlas and the guilds that are a part of it, they're the figureheads here. No matter if new people come in, they'll probably with open arms accept them into that United Nations of Star Atlas. But the longer we are involved in doing what we're doing as Rome with these podcasts and garnering more support and enthusiasm for the game, especially during these downtimes in the market, it just strengthens that other part of the gameplay that's outside of the actual gameplay of Star Atlas. So I think it's pretty interesting that the longer you stick to it, just like anything else in life, it just get better, more efficient, and there's more influence that you'll have in the space. So
Yeah.
get involved now and get your name out there, just like Ash, and even yourself, Newt. We were essentially no one to everyone else up until we started doing what we were doing, whether it was writing articles, hosting Twitter Spaces, or or building a guild together. So it's get started.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about when I said that friendships are the most valuable assets in Star Atlas, right? You can have any number of polis, but people won't join you if they don't know you, if they don't trust your intentions or what are your goals, what are your plans. You can't buy people alliance like that. Even if you have all the polis in the world, all the money in the world, at the end of the day, we are just all passionate gamers who want to experience a new level of gameplay, right? And we want to find people like us to share this journey with. That's why I'm thinking that Nootopia has a bright future, because I'm talking with the members of this community who embraces this ideal, who are gamers like me, who want to experience this next level of complexity of gameplay, of graphics. And yeah, as long as we can keep ourselves together with Star Atlas by acquiring polis, by holding positions of political and economical relevance in the game, we will preserve this game in the way that we want it to play out, right? And
Exactly.
that's our mission as the founding members of this project, if I may say it like that.
Perfectly said.
So, ZeSSK, you had mentioned privately that you are working on some other things and might have some things coming. What are you working on now? You just dropped a new part 3 of your POLIS Medium articles. What's next?
My next step will be talking about just this theme we are discussing now, the Metaverse Governance Global DAO. And I'll try to do some math about the different supplies of holders of POLIS, of the kinds of voting we might expect in the first days. I think that we'll see lots of votings concern the limits of the regional DAO and the faction DAOs, like the possibilities of the faction DAO establishing limits to the policies and taxations, and maybe creating another mechanisms for the faction DAOs to enforce rules or participation in wars and events. And I'll discuss that and much more on my next article.
And there's, well, not to open up a can of worms, but there's actually a level below the faction DAO, or excuse me, the regional DAO that we really haven't discussed too much, and that's the guild DAC. And we know all the guilds have some degree of voting within them, whether they have a council like us who supports a community, or they have a direct democracy and one leader. That's also going to be a topic that I think is going to play into this, because you're going to see different people potentially even jumping guilds because of how that's showing up leading into the faction governance.
That's a really interesting topic that I hadn't talked about, because since I'm not a member of any guild, I was kind of concerned talking about this topic because I don't have the first-hand experience. But actually, I have seen lots of different guilds organizations, and maybe I can try to bring my readers some examples, like how this works on home, how the club's organization works, how the pirates from Skull and Bones and the dark guilds organize themselves. That might be actually interesting. That's a great topic. Thank you, Benja, for the tip.
You're welcome. I'll take a 1% cut.
See, our
Just
Julius
kidding.
Caesar already working.
Well, before we kind of pivot into some other Star Atlas news, folks, anyone around the horn have some additional questions for ZeSSK that we didn't get a chance to ask?
There was another quote that I pulled from one of his articles that maybe I can share here, and it's one of the sayings of Brazil. And you could always elaborate more on it, but I thought this stood out for why I took a snapshot of it. And it reads as, "Finally, we have a saying here in Brazil that translates as nothing like a day after another. If we have good assets, they might have dipped today, they might dip tomorrow, but they won't dip forever. So don't feel too bad about the markets and your net worth just plummeting into the ether. It'll bounce back."
Yes, a message for hope on those dark days of the dips, right? It's really interesting seeing the chat how the public perception of an objective reality changes when money is concerned, right? One day when the ship's prices were renegotiating with big premiums, people, oh, that's a marvel, the ships are awesome. And then on the next day on the jeep, people are sad because, oh my god, this is going to explode, it's a scam, it's a rug pull. And guys, it's the same ship, it's like 48 hours apart from each other, and no one's going to die. Okay, take a breath, everything is gonna be all right. Nothing like a day after another day, and things will work out.
Beautiful.
So we have a question in chat here, and again, no one should ever consider this show as financial advice, but I think it's an interesting topic. What do you guys think about the market cap over the next 3 months versus 2 to 3 years down the line?
Well, let's see. What is it right now?
I think it depends a lot. I mean, I mentioned this a number of times over the past couple of weeks. The value in something tends to go where people place their attention. where you place your attention, you place your energy. And we saw that with ships. And I think that the moment that the DAO comes out, we're going to see a similar thing there. Now, what exactly is going to happen at that point? Are we going to find support back up around 8? Is it going to be 10, which is like 4x from what it is right now? Will it go higher? I mean, it's anybody's guess, really. It just really depends on how the DAO is structured and if people are going to see enough immediate reward versus long term, where they have to lock up for a while and then they're able to quarterly see some rewards from it. So it depends on a lot of things. But yeah, I think we'll know more as soon as hopefully at the end of February. I know there's been some mild talk that there could be more pushbacks because they're looking at a few different ways to bring the DAO to life. But then again, versus 2 to 3 years down the road, man, I don't even think we're going to recognize the metaverse and blockchain space in this industry 3 years from now, that there's going to be so much change between now and then. So it would just be a crystal ball trying to guess that far out.
I think not determining a market cap figure per se, but if Wagner is aiming for this new year to have at least 500,000 members in the Discord, that means there's more eyes and more money educating themselves on the space. So yeah, maybe a $1 billion market cap is, the floor when it comes to any new particular project. So if that's what we'll essentially get to and never get to it and never go above, let's say if it was just $1 billion, then you're looking pretty, dollar cost averaging in. If $1 billion is what we're going to eventually get to, with it only being POLIS 55 million. So I wouldn't, not financial advice again. It's just that I see the project growing, and just within the last year, although most of us or many of us were invested earlier on in the 2017 years of NFTs, we didn't see any. It was almost like you were in the Twilight Zone, just with no major companies being involved, no news coverage of Bitcoin. There was nothing happening other than what you and the groups of people in the Discords or the projects that you were involved in. And it was so far-fetched of a thought that it would ever happen. But if it did, it would take up until retirement age to even have the impact of what we're seeing now taking place. So it's really, like just saying, a crystal ball. The acceleration of everything is just going to be, otherworldly when it comes to the space and how it's developed. So I just see it going up.
ZeSSK, any thoughts?
Well, don't have the actual numbers, but I hope that in 3 years I will be retired in Utopia, right?
Us too. All right. Well, ZeSSK, I invite you to stick with us. We're going to cover some other Star Atlas news and drops, and then we'll get into some industry stuff as well. But please don't feel like you don't have a voice. If we're talking about something you've got a perspective on, you're a welcome part of the group. So, Fancy, why don't you run us through some of the updates?
Yes, so this week we had this leak dropped on us, and I'll just leave it looping in the background. It looks really cool, in my opinion, and you can see some things they turn around. I don't think they would go through the effort of making like a GIF if they just wanted to show one thing.
Right.
Yeah, so I split the GIF up into like images and tried to find the clearest ones of what it could be. And this is close up of the window.
I was wondering what that was myself, and I don't think you getting this picture for me helps me at all.
Not at all, no.
There was some intrigue around this GIF. There was a drop on Twitter that seemed to happen organically. And then, the dev team came through and said, let's get 1,000 retweets and we'll show something. And then we got to 1,000 retweets and it didn't come as quickly as some people wanted. So that created some of those scam rug pull type of comments. But in my experience, Star Atlas has always shown up. They've always given us the goods when they said they would. And there's apparently another picture out there that's like this, or GIF, that hasn't been shared yet, and I think they're trying to do another tweet storm to get to it. But the one thing I will say about engagement farming, which is what this kind of felt like, it's good in small amounts, but if you do it every single time there's a leak, it just gets really annoying. Gala Games does this all the time, and it's just not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like this approach as well.
Yeah.
But any-
Outside of, Yep.
But
ahead.
the leak was really great, though.
Oh
But
yeah,
the leak is
absolutely.
really good. Yeah, I love it. I was like, Noot, what the hell? It's awesome.
Well, for me, it gives you a really good scale. I mean, we've seen the pictures of little people next to the O-Pod, but to kind of walk into a room and see it, and I'm not sure, is that the same room where somebody flew it into on the video they showed us a while back?
Perhaps it is. Yeah, it could be. There's like the open garage behind it.
Yeah, imagine this C11 on this kind of showroom, guys. It will be awesome.
We can't see any of that upper layer that we could in the other perspective, where we could kind of see like statues in the background.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got.
There it is. Yeah, that
What
one.
do we think, guys? Same
Oh,
building?
I don't know. I don't know if that's the
I
same
don't think
place.
so.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same.
Yeah,
and also
yeah.
it's also that ship has
Darker.
a different skin on it as well.
Mhm.
You know, the question I have is, has there been any talk as to whether Star Atlas perspective is going to be first or third person?
I haven't really heard any about it.
I seem to recall somebody saying it's first person. When we get to Unreal Engine, and prior to that, it might be top down 3/4. Similar to some of the more grand strategy games that we've seen. I don't know if there's been any confirmation to the overall public in that regard. What else you got there, Fancy?
So this ship that we looked at last week, we was pretty sure it is a Vesus, and I found the art station that it was on, and it had the title of Vesus Ballad, so that might be the name of it.
Well, it sounds like our resident music maker needs to do a ballad about the Visa. Right? We've got
Perfect time.
Atlas Minor. Now we need the Visa's pilot.
Yeah, and the team also did a Solana boot camp this week. I did try and like zoom in on these pictures to see if they were looking at anything, but just standard stock photos, really. This is them finishing it. Yeah, sorry,
I
Red.
was going to say that the fellow on the right seems to be trying to get across some specific information and ideas about the tree arrow. I don't know how old this photo is. You know, I know you said it was a recent boot camp they went to, but are these guys on the team, or they're like? I'm curious. I don't know who are these guys, but that was just my own thoughts.
Maybe he's trying to use the Force.
Speed up the process of making it real.
And so we also got the roadmap report this week, and there was a bit of controversy when this was released because of like the wording and about the DAO. Security concerns were identified and were pivoting towards an alternative governance solution. So when that dropped, people were getting a bit salty on Twitter, like interpreting this as like a big delay. So Wagner tweeted out that it's still targeted for Q1.
Yeah, I got the sense it was a technical issue that they had to overcome, and they're looking for a different, solution. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was kind of scared when they first released it, the news. I was like, oh my God, what's happening with the POLIS DAO? But since it was I have even heard that they will still keeping the target date for February, so it might not be something big. Let's hope so.
And also, it would make them look even more stupid to reaffirm that it's still going to be in February and then postpone it to March, even if it's the beginning of March. After what happened here, Wagner comes back out just to reiterate, like, it's going to be in February. No fixed date of February, but if it is going to be delayed, it doesn't look good at all.
But that last tweet we saw said Q1, which gives all the way through the end of March.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, two thoughts on that. One, when it comes to money and security, I think that should always be paramount, irrespective of timelines. And two, I think it speaks to the transparency of the dev team. We know other dev teams would not share this type of information. It would be a black hole of information. So, do what they need to do. That's my opinion. The money will come when it comes.
Yeah. There was some guild members saying that if they're going to mention like a bug, be more specific about it, because it's quite ambiguous, the statement. So like a lot of people were wondering what's going on, but it could just be like a tiny little thing that they didn't really allude to that much. But
well, there was an interesting bug that popped up in Foundation Room, and I'm not going to speak to the specifics of it because I don't think that's the type of information you should share broadly. But it was something that definitely had some security impacts, and I don't know if this is related to what that was, but I'm just glad we have people right now in the community who are looking to solve problems and not look for the angles to get in and take advantage of them.
for sure,
Yeah, that's awesome.
Any others?
That was it on Star Atlas, actually. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we have, we're sitting at about 2 hours and 14. I think we have some AXIE updates and potentially some Illuvium updates as well.
I think that can be skipped this week.
Okay. So maybe we'll do AXIE and then jump into some of the industry news. So Ray, why don't you take it away with some AXIE stuff?
Sure thing. Here we go. Sharing this good old screen here. And so two major things happened in the last week or two, not even just a week. And we had the Builders Program. So shout out to the community member of the Spanish community for AXIE Infinity, Zio. If you're listening, thanks for doing these. It's a great help to just explain what's going on with these updates. So the co-creation, then we have grants. So if we're going on to the right-hand side, and there's guidance, economy boost. So the Builders Program consists of all these things, and we're ultimately building together here. And we'll get into the first snapshot of the article that was released and the benefits section of it. Teams that are chosen to be a part of the program will receive, and mind you, this is a $5,000 grant of AXS that goes to the projects. So it's $400,000 in grants available for this program, and the program is going to help community members build whatever games they want on top of or with AXIE Infinity. So there's going to be an SDK that members can build games out of, and there was already two way back in 2018 and 2019 that were created by community members before this program was even live, which we'll get to in slides to come. Second bullet point, so there's guidance from the Sky Mavis Engineering. There's going to be guidance from Sky Mavis Game Design and Product. There's going to be exclusive access to integrations such as Ronin, the Ronin Network Testnet, and the Ronin Wallet. So there's going to be integration for all these mini games. It's going to be the next best thing that happens outside of any other publisher or game company that is having their game on the Ronin network outside of AXIE Infinity. And then last, this promotion of their product by Sky Mavis to the community. So you'll get some promotion there as well to help your game grow popularity. And then here just roughly the bullet points. So these are the things that the team are encouraging these creators and their games to do when they build out their game. And there's going to be payment by players is done in SLP or AXS. So this is going to help with the increased syncs for SLP that are needed to help with the price and the over minting of SLP, which has been a main problem for a long while now. And then at least 10% of all revenue must be burned. So that's the SLP, or go to the community treasury which is AXS. The Sky Mavis team will help with advising on monetization models. Some example models ideas include entry fee funded prizes. So within PvP experiences, players can pay for entry fees in SLP and AXS that go into a pool. Winners take a majority of the pool. So there's a lot of incentives here. There's leaderboard winnings. So just like we have in the current arena model for the official AXIE Infinity game. And then the token, there's a new token. So players pay with SLP and AXS for new tokens that would be created by these individual developers, which could be named anything. and the NFTs that can be obtained in the game. So it's all up to the creativity of the individual builders, whose applications get approved, mind you, because G-Host, before we get into some evaluation criteria, which you could just read off here, I won't go through all of them, but these are just for you, if you are a game developer, to take into account. And there was a tweet by G-Host saying that out of the tens of thousands of applicants that already put in, there's only 1,300 that are going to be, there's only a small amount, and I'm sorry, there was only 1,300 total so far within a day or even hours of this program going live with the application. And there's going to be a small section, the small amount of people who are accepted. So there's going to be more opportunities like this in the future, G-Host was saying, but this is what we have to look forward to, some example project ideas. So you got AXIE Tamagotchi, AXIE Bomberman, AXIE Tower Defense, AXIE Racing, AXIE Chess, AXIE Platformer, like an unlimited amount of ideas, that could be created for games with AXIEs that utilize AXIE. You could recreate Neopet games with AXIE assets, AXIE Trivia, AXIE educational game like Math Blasters. There was a fun joke going around of like AXIE fruit. What's that game on the phone where you slice with your finger the fruits, and it was like a
Fruit Ninja.
Fruit Ninja.
There you go. So AXIE Fruit Ninja, and then you can see your AXIEs get sliced and killed in front of your screen. That's pretty graphic, but that's also a potential game that could be created. If you really just dislike AXIEs, you could just play that one game and just slice your AXIEs away. And
only if it burns them. That would be awesome.
Right. And what's interesting, there's a community member also, just a fact on that note, that tracks and on the back end for the addresses on Ronin, like Etherscan is, but there's the equivalent to that for SoulScan, and then also one for Ronin and the network. So all the AXIEs that are being quote unquote burned or sent on a journey, this is the PG-13 phrasing of your AXIEs basically dying, are not technically dying, or being lost to the ether. They're on a wallet that nothing is being sent out of, that is in control of the team themselves. So there's all this speculation around all of those AXIEs are going to be used for what? Are they going to be given to people to play as these burner AXIEs, that are going to just be swapped in and out? There's a whole bunch of theory crafting that's going around. What are our AXIEs going to be who went on a journey used for in the future? Because they're not actually gone. They're NFTs that live forever on the blockchain, and that's just another interesting thing. But here we have a still shot of the OG community members for Axie Infinity, but also in other games that we know of, Coco Bear and Clumsier, and then Russ Frankie. They built Flappy Axie. So this was a game in October of 2018, around there. Yep, on the bottom you see the date. Excuse the line, it's covering it. And this was a game everyone was playing in the community, created by community members, and it was a fun game, just like Flappy Axie at the time. And there was a website you go to under maintenance, it says, if you go there. But that was pretty cool. And then here we have a video. There's some volume. There's someone's talking. And this was another game that was created before its time, Axie Sushi. So you can, I'll play it now.
This looks like that carnival game where you race horses.
Right.
Can you guys hear the audio?
No.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So, yeah, when I was sharing, I didn't click audio, but so for the most part, each Axie and the corresponding stats that they have with speed, morale, and more for critical chances, all play a factor in which Axie in this race, consuming all the sushi until the end, is going to win. So there's critical chances of them eating 2 sushis instead of just 1 as they go along. And you see maybe the buffs on top of their head where it's just like speed up. The battle mechanics and the battle stats, they're deployed within this game when they're eating the sushi. And then we'll just get to the finish line here. And, again, all these games that are created, they're going to have their own incentives, their own burn mechanisms, their own it's going to be an insane amount of creativity and development that's taking place with the community members. So there's extra and added utility for our AXIEs. And then we had, its own leaderboard. We could just fast forward here. The details of each match you can see, and then on the top right, you would have your the leaderboard here, the actual names and how many games were played. And yeah, so any thoughts on any particular games after that last after that update that you would like to see?
guess, Ray, here's my thought on this, and I can't think of too many other games that use the same IP for different game types. I mean, they're there. You've got Mario Brothers and Mario Kart. That's probably the best example I can think of.
Sure.
But I'm just wondering if they're trying to go in too many different directions instead of just maximizing AXIE and fine tuning that. I mean, if it's a user generated game, I get it, but it seems to me, well, just based on what you shared before, I'm not sure if that's just like a click and forget or what the skill is to do it, but it seems pretty basic.
Yeah. So mind you, these were in 2018, 2019, not many incentives to have a developer go to their full extent of building a game. That's, this was a pretty simple thing. I'm not a developer, but as we see it, it's very simple. So these are just drops in the bucket of what people are going to be able to, with the funding and the support and the marketing of Sky Mavis behind them, they're going to be able to create games that are going to be fantastic, and also just utilize the 2 token model or the 2 tokens themselves, which we just finished seeing the requirements, the guidelines, the things that the team requires any developer to build and incorporate into their game. So all of these things are going to just, in my opinion, help the economy. And this SLP, over time, there's going to be just many more things that come out, which was going to be land and other tokens that are tradable against all the other tokens that are going to be in existence. But do you guys have any particular games you would like to see? I mentioned the fruit slicing one. Do you have any particular games? Maybe a Star Galactica type of, your AXIEs on the bottom shooting what? So stuff at the top. I know you guys don't personally play the game, but you could basically create anything.
Well,
No,
to me,
I want to see all of those pooled AXIEs that you were trying to think of what could be done with them. I want them all released into the wild so they can become attack NPCs.
Yeah, I mentioned that too. They can become chimera. So these are the evil monsters that are gonna, from you abandoning your AXIE and disowning them, they're gonna turn against you, and you'll have many enemies to fight.
Oh, that's dark.
right, an adventure. And if potentially maybe capturing them back somehow, I don't know, and then that would be pretty cool. But here we just have the next major update that just took place, the Lunacian Express, all aboard. So this is the process of releasing your AXIE on a journey in exchange for a parting gift, which is going to be one of 5 items, land items, which are forest. So there's different, and then also below that here on the right-hand side, there's a chance when you send off your, so here are the items, and when you send off your AXIE on a journey, the percent chances of you getting the first item, sorted firecrackers, snack box, tree, lantern, tiger, decrease. So, if you're lucky out there, you might have gotten the Crimson Tiger, but each actually who's released will guarantee one of these 5 items. Try to collect all 5. Note that the Crimson Tiger is extremely rare, and you'll have to be truly lucky to get it. So, some people burned over 100 and got 1 Crimson Tiger. Some people burnt 50 or less than that and got 3 Crimson Tigers. So you just never know. And these items are going to be tradable and finite. So after this 1 month of you being able to burn AXIEs or sending them on a journey, it's up to the people who own these items to sell them on the market. And there's going to be many more of these types of things going on as time goes on.
It's a very political sounding name. If I were thinking about American politics, I would automatically see the negative side of send them on a journey. Because usually we paint rosy pictures on policies that are going to be not good.
It's for the children, Banjo. It's always for the children. Okay? We're doing all of these terrible things in the world for the children. So here's the second part of that, where you'll automatically be entered in a raffle, and there's a ticker on the bottom that shows your chance percentages of actually winning one of 5 AOC tokens, which if you have all 5, or if you have a total of 5, you can roll a new origin AXIE to creation, and there's a percent chance that one of the 6 body parts or all 6 are mystic, and the higher you go as far as the body count for mystic, the rarer it is, just like we saw with this item drop here. The harder the chance of you getting it. And then also this item here, and these 2 items on the right hand side, they all have particular effects in game for your AXIEs, so you could check that out. But that's not all. Every AXIE release will generate to enter the raffle. So the first winner, so one winner will get 5 tokens, and then 10 the item, and 100 winners will get the epic land. So go send your AXIEs on a journey. And then we can continue here. And here there's also a tab that you can check for the total released AXIEs and the participants. So this was maybe like 4 hours ago. I took this snapshot, so we're at maybe a little bit over 75,000. But then there's a leaderboard on the right-hand side that you could check out. And people are gunning for the top spot because your chances of winning these raffled items are just that much greater. And they run for many Ethereum. So the sacrifice of sending many or 339 AXIEs on a journey there's a lot of upside there for people who are doing so. And last but not least, this is a Twitter space that Bryson held in the community and G-Host was on, and this is the most recent talkings with G-Host on all the topics that took place with these 2 updates and some other questions that were asked. So if you're interested in hearing more about any of these updates, just check out the Twitter space, search Bryson, or just go to G-Host's or Axie Infinity, and you could listen to that. It was probably an hour and 23 minutes. And that's pretty much it for the updates. Back to you, Bob, on the timeline, or Banjo. Sorry, not Bob.
I've been called worse.
Okay.
Hey, Fancy, why don't you we got some good time left. Why don't you hit us with some industry news?
Yeah, so this week the CEO of BlackRock Investments, they bought a Bored Ape, 135 ETH.
Easy.
Yeah, I think for those who don't know, BlackRock are probably one of the biggest players in the investment field in the entire world.
Yep.
They own many of the companies and have some people love them, some people hate them and think they're the root of all evil. But the idea that this BlackRock is getting into, a blockchain ETF they just launched, and also they're buying Bored Ape Yacht Club NFTs, that tells you the big money is here, and things could get really interesting going forward.
Yeah, what a fancy monkey. So other big news this week.
What's that, Zess?
He should have bought a NOOT.
Yeah.
So the other big news this week was Microsoft purchasing Activision Blizzard. Yeah, huge news.
Was that 68 billion?
79, I think.
Ah, okay.
Wow.
17 billion. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but a lot of titles coming to a platform, and all the esports as well that comes with Blizzard. They have a lot of. Go on, Jesse.
So they mentioned that they wanted to try as quickly as they could to port a lot of this stuff to Xbox. But what do we think? I mean, when we see a move like this, what do we think their long-term play is? What are they trying to accomplish here?
Well, I personally think this is a response to Meta, Facebook, right? So now that we know that you've got companies moving into this space in a big way, we know that this is, in my personal opinion, this is the 90s internet boom that we're seeing here. And the big players are looking for a way to get the content that people are going to want in the metaverse, whether it's a destination that you go to or NFT sales of different specific items. And I think Microsoft just built a war chest of amazing games that people love. And I think there's people who are going to think that's a fantastic thing, and there's going to be people who think that's the worst thing to ever happen to gaming.
Yeah. I think even with this move, I think they're still like number 3 or something like that. You've got Sony, and I don't remember who the other one is. as far as game developers now.
Yeah, it's
Well,
the top three: It's Sony, Tencent, and in China, it's China first, and then there's Sony, and then Activision last with this latest acquisition.
Yeah, but what I found interesting about this was that like Microsoft called this a like a metaverse opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of these platforms, especially like World of Warcraft, they haven't got that much love from Blizzard in the last few years.
Right.
And yeah, I know a lot of people are thinking it can't get worse.
Right, and I think these games could become the equivalent of Ember Sword, where there's only skins that are tradable, where you can dungeon dive and earn skins for your character or skins for the weapons. And although there was some backlash with Steam and then Ubisoft doing what they did, it's just almost inevitable at this point, especially with these whales of companies doing what they're doing. And as we know in World of Warcraft, no matter what the community says, they just kind of do what they do, and kind of railroad any community members who just lash out against in non-support of what they're doing. And it's just going to become commonplace for just big games like this to start on a small level with just skins, maybe, as they are already, just with now it's going to be on the blockchain.
But then the question becomes: are they really planning on doing anything on chain?
Maybe not.
Or are they just leveraging the buzzword now because metaverse is a hot term? And so you want to work that into the news to make it more newsworthy. But I'm curious how long it will be before we actually see some real choice action or something that leads us to say, okay, that's metaverse related.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's, it's all in Microsoft's hands right now. At best, I think we'll probably see them continue to market this as metaverse. We may see them just go into the skins game, or they may see an opportunity to go all in on the idea of NFT ownership in games. And they have the capital to really make it happen faster than some of the other smaller dev companies like Gala, for example. Microsoft can really press some buttons pretty quick to get things going. The thing that I would be curious is if they go that route, what blockchain they use, and how do we learn about that ahead of time so we can take advantage of it.
I think two of the lowest hanging fruit up there that could be really freaking awesome. And I'm surprised no one has done this yet, and I keep waiting for the first one. But who is going to take the first off-the-shelf version of like a World of Warcraft, or in the other one in that screenshot that came to mind is Diablo? I think you could create marketplaces pretty darn quick around those two, and I would love to be able to play it. I think if someone came out with a Warcraft, a WoW version of something on chain, the thing that we all hope that it's someday Miranda's could be, but I think it's a millennia away from happening. I would love to see that with something off the shelf that's already proven to be fun and playable, and now just put it on chain and make it a play to earn. I think that would be amazing, because then you're not trying to do too many things at once, not trying to do too many new firsts.
And there's a lot of nostalgia tied to those games as well, right? That would bring people back. I mean, I would love, I wasn't a World of Warcraft guy, I was an EverQuest guy, but I would love to see EverQuest put on the blockchain and have that same level of everything that you're describing.
Yeah. It would take crafting and the marketplace. That would just be so much fun.
It's already there. You just have to adjust the economies a little bit.
Yeah.
Hey, Fancy, I think you have another video here about another company that's unexpectedly wanting to get into the metaverse, and that's Walmart. So why don't you share this video, and if it has audio, play the audio, and give us a sense of what Walmart wants to do in the metaverse.
Great. Looks like you need a good wine pairing. Take a look to your right. Your age has already been pre-verified through your profile, so no need to wait for an ID check. Just place the item in your cart whenever you're ready.
He just threw it in there.
This is kind of like those Amazon Go stores in the metaverse, right?
Yeah, and it'd be quite cool to just pick what you want and get it delivered to your door by a drone or delivery truck. That's the idea behind this.
So, but what is the real utility of this? I mean, rather than I just go to Amazon and rather than walking a cart down the aisle, I just pick from a list and images of things I want. Rather than this, do I need this experience?
Good
Is this
news.
like a
Your order's
valuable part of my day where
Your
I'm
vehicle will be
instead
ready
of
for
going to the
Entire
grocery
Express.
store, I'm
Add
virtually
6
walking
charge
through a
free
grocery
package.
store?
Right, and that's a great point. So this
Now,
video
for the fun
was
stuff.
actually
To
released in
electronics.
2017, 2018, when there was the initial announcement of Walmart dabbling into VR shopping experiences, but also blockchain, technology. And so
You
this is
definitely
very
saved the
old of a
best for
video.
last.
But
This
you're
TV
right.
has
Who the
great
hell
reviews
is
on
going to spend
Walmart.com.
their time, as they
Add it
don't
to
even
your
want to do
cart
that in
and
real
we'll have
life,
it
but
brought to
order
your house
everything
for you.
from Amazon or get delivered to their house, be in a situation like this? Maybe to experience
Need
once,
any
twice,
accessories?
but a lot of
Here are
people's
some
time
options
are
on
more
Jet.com.
valuable, I think, doing many other things than actually having a headset on or shopping in this way.
And who signed off on building that whole thing out? But I think it's funny what you said. This the conversation recently was, "Hey guys, we already got this thing we built. Let's repurpose it.
everything on your
Metaverse.
list.
Let's go."
Right? But I feel like they've educated themselves enough from
Oh
the
my
release
God.
of this video to now maybe
I'll have the
articulate
TV brought out to
what
your
they're
car.
trying to do in a better
Thanks
way
for shopping
that's
at
more
Walmart. Have a great day.
native to everyone who's in the space. Because
Right.
they're actually talking about
Look at
having
that, man.
tokens and blockchain and which one. It's a
That looked like
Pretty-
a blockbuster video or anything.
yeah, pretty comical.
I don't know that metaverse shopping is ever going to take off the way they think it's going to. And I know that most of the major brands are getting into it, but shopping for many people is a sensory experience, right? It's the tactile, it's touching, it's picking it up, it's looking at it, or if it's food, it's smelling it. I have no interest in shopping in any store in the metaverse at this point.
Look, ZeSSK comment. Oh my god.
Well, I think that we have consensus that's probably not a great thing for Walmart to be getting into metaverse. Right?
Round vote for me.
All right. Well, it has now been 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm going to go around the horn and see if anybody has any last thoughts. We'll close out with ZeSSK, and then we'll put another one down in the book. So, Jesse, any closing thoughts or anything on your mind?
I love that, ZeSSK, that you are putting a lot of thought and effort into what Polis can become and educating people on things they might not have considered. I think that's really important. I think it's valuable to the community as a whole. So thank you for doing that for sure. So it's a great conversation. I love theory crafting, especially over the things that are going to impact gameplay as well as the development of the game itself. Only other closing thoughts I have is that for the next 2 weeks, back to back, we have special guests again. So I don't know when we'll announce who those are, but they're going to be great shows, so you don't want to miss them.
Fantastic. Ray, how about you?
Once again, thank you. Great guest. You're the man, and I look forward to visiting Newtopia. And just shout out to Rome if I had any particular plans for any
Sure.
helping hands are all around, just like you mentioned. But other than that, once again, thank you. And then also everyone watching, please like, subscribe. You could join the guild at gorome.io. And there's all these particular channels that have great resources for you to learn more about what's happening. You can even see Newt in and out particular days. But we appreciate you all, and that's it for me.
Very good. Fancy, how about you?
Yeah, if you want to join Rome, you can pause the video at this time and just have a look at what all of our squads do. You can join us through the Go Rome link, and see you there. Thanks for watching.
Well, I think this episode has been entirely enlightening. I think, ZeSSK, you need to add a name to your list of titles, and that's the Professor of Polis. I think people have taken you to be very relaxing and soothing, and they've learned a lot today.
It was awesome, guys.
And
Thank
we're
you
very
very
happy to have had you. And I'll leave that, ZeSSK, with any closing thoughts you may have.
Yeah, I would like to thank you guys, Jesse, Ray, Fancy, and you, Benjo. It was awesome. It was fun. And my last thought is that Walmart, listen to those guys. You can build your homeworld here in Utopia. It's only 1 million polis. I'll have my open flap wings for you here, okay?
And and if you could, before you go, ZeSSK, if you could share how people can find you.
Sure. You guys have my Medium. Yeah, right there. I always post my articles on Twitter as well, Jojo Crypto Quest, and I do lots of nooting on Discord as well, of Star Atlas Discord, and we talk. I'm open for DMs and any collabs like we just did with Rome guys, and hope to be back here again sometime soon with you guys.
Oh, you're always welcome, and I hope we do have you back again. So ZeSSK, and to the entire community, thank you for joining us. Again, we love these long-form podcasts where we get to talk about theory crafting, reading on exciting people, and give different perspectives on all things metaverse. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you, guys.
Are you ready for the next evolution in gaming? Blockchain games are here. Why just play when you can play to earn? Enter the Star Atlas Metaverse with Rome. Star Atlas is a grand strategy game of space exploration, territorial conquest, political domination, and so much more. Rome is a premier guild of the Oni faction within Star Atlas. Rome is here to play and to earn. Want to take part in the action? Rome is accepting new citizens. Join the Rome Guild on Discord to learn more at gorome.io.